and welcome to the June 1st, 2023 meeting of the Boulder City Council. I'm going to start us off with an announcement. And that is that the 2023 Boards and Commissions mid-year recruitment period is now open from May 29th to July 2nd, 2023. We are accepting applications for the following boards or commissions: the Beverage Licensing Authority, the Boulder Junction Access District Parking, the Boulder Junction Access District Travel Demand Management, the Downtown Management Commission, the Landmarks Board, and the University Hill Commercial Area Management Commission. So you can find board and commission descriptions and vacancies online at www.bouldercolorado.gov/boards-commissions. And if you have any questions or need assistance, you can contact the City Clerk's Office at cityclerksoffice@bouldercolorado.gov or call 303-441-4222. And with that, I will go ahead and call us to order and ask if we could do the roll call, please, Alicia.
Yes, sir, and good evening, everyone. We'll start our roll call tonight with Councilmember Benjamin.
Present.
Mayor Brockett.
Present.
Councilmember Folkerts.
Present.
Friend.
Here.
Joseph.
Present.
Spear.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Wallach is absent. Councilmember Weiner.
Present.
And Yates.
Proud to be here.
Mayor, we have our quorum.
Excellent. Well, speaking of proud, that was not a coincidence. We're going to begin tonight's meeting with a Pride Month declaration to be presented by Councilmember Nicole Spear.
Thank you. And for everybody in the audience, I don't know how much this will come through for folks watching from home. We did our best to dress in an assortment of rainbow colors to show our pride tonight. So joining in with everyone else in the community who is celebrating the beginning of Pride Month. More than 50 years ago, patrons and supporters of the Stonewall Inn in New York City resisted police harassment that had become all too common for members of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer LGBTQ+ community. Out of this resistance, the LGBTQ+ rights movement in America was born. During LGBTQ+ Pride Month, we commemorate the events of June 1969 and commit to achieving equal justice under law for LGBTQ+ individuals. Boulder has a diverse LGBTQ+ community that includes people of many ethnicities, religions, and professions, and we consider diversity to be a community asset that enhances and enriches the lives of every resident, worker, visitor, and student in our city. LGBTQ+ individuals are our teachers, baristas, volunteers, tech workers, current and future leaders, and elders. They keep our community going while dealing with the anti-LGBTQ+ bias and discrimination that persists even here in Boulder and that is growing across the country. We are grateful for the work of local advocacy groups such as Out Boulder County, OASOS, and the Pride Office at CU Boulder, and for other local organizations such as Queer Asterisk and A Queer Endeavor that support our LGBTQ+ community members, many of whom have intersecting marginalized identities that are not always honored and celebrated in our city. Although other states and even the United States Supreme Court are taking away or limiting the rights of LGBTQ+ individuals and families, advocacy from the LGBTQ+ community in Boulder County and allies across the state led to some significant victories this year. Our legislature ensured that our state will not cooperate in investigations of people who travel to Colorado for reproductive or gender-affirming care. And attempts to change our state constitution to restrict LGBTQ+ students' privacy and access to life-saving community connections failed, as did a ban on transgender athletes' participation in sports. We thank everyone in the LGBTQ+ community who continues to work to keep yourself and our community going. In many respects, there have been profound successes in the rights, protections, and general community acceptance of LGBTQ+ people in the past 50 years. So as our city celebrates Pride this month, we not only honor our LGBTQ+ communities and advocacy organizations for their continued work to achieve equity in our systems, we also restate our commitment to this ongoing work to promote and protect everyone in our community, regardless of gender or sexuality. We, the City Council of the City of Boulder, Colorado, declare June 2023 as Pride Month and urge all residents to respect and honor the diversity in our community, to celebrate and continue building a culture of inclusiveness and acceptance, and to stand up against injustice in all its forms. Thank you.
We had a lovely flag raising ceremony downtown earlier today to raise the Pride flag at Pearl and Broadway. So thanks to everyone who's able to attend that. All right, our next declaration is for National Gun Violence Awareness Day, presented by Councilmember Rachel Friend.
I would like to invite moms to come up and be up here while I read this. And dads, Moms Demand Action folk. Moms and friends. Aw, I might cry. Okay. All right, here we go. I'm Rachel Friend, and I'll be reading the National Gun Violence Awareness Day Declaration. June 2nd, 2023. Every day, more than 110 Americans are killed by gun violence. On average, there are more than 16,000 gun homicides every year, and Americans are 26 times more likely to die by gun homicide than people in other high-income countries. Colorado has an average of 930 gun deaths every year, with a rate of 15.6 deaths per 100,000 people. Colorado has the 22nd highest rate of gun deaths in the U.S. Gun homicides predominantly occur in cities, with more than half of all firearm-related gun deaths in the nation occurring in 127 cities. Cities across the nation, including in Boulder, are working to end gun violence with evidence-based solutions. Protecting public safety in the communities they serve is the highest responsibility of our council. Support for the Second Amendment rights of responsible community members goes hand in hand with keeping guns away from people with dangerous and violent histories. Council and law enforcement officers know their communities, are the most familiar with local criminal activity and how to address it, and are well positioned to understand how to keep community members safe. In January 2013, Hadia Pendleton, a teenager who marched in the presidential inaugural parade and was tragically shot and killed just weeks later, should now be celebrating her 25th birthday. To help honor Hadia and the more than 110 Americans whose lives are cut short every single day, and the countless survivors who are injured by shootings every single day, a national coalition of organizations has designated the first Friday in June as National Gun Violence Awareness Day. The idea was inspired by a group of Hadia's friends who asked their classmates to commemorate her life by wearing orange. They chose this color because hunters wear orange to announce themselves to other hunters when out in the woods, and orange is a color that symbolizes the value of human life. Following the King Soopers Table Mesa mass shooting on March 22nd, 2021 in the city of Boulder, we renew our commitment to reduce gun violence now more than ever and pledge to do all we can to keep firearms out of the wrong hands and encourage responsible gun ownership to help keep our community safe. So we, the City Council of the City of Boulder, Colorado, declare June 2nd, 2023 as National Gun Violence Awareness Day and encourage all community members to support their local community's efforts to prevent the tragic effects of gun violence and to honor and value human lives. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jean Bucci, and it is a huge honor to be up here with you all. Thank you for all the work you do. And I'm going to hold the microphone.
Thank you, Councilmember Friend, Mayor Brockett, City Council members. On behalf of the Boulder Group of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, thank you for this declaration of June 2nd as National Gun Violence Awareness Day. As we all know, the epidemic of gun violence in our country is causing tragedy and heartbreak daily, including a tragedy at our own Table Mesa King Soopers. It is incumbent upon all of us to work together to bring an end to these preventable tragedies. We wish to thank the Boulder City Council for its leadership on gun violence prevention. You have taken bold action to address this issue. You have not backed down, even when subjected to personal insults and threats of lawsuits. The slate of gun violence prevention ordinances passed unanimously by this council in 2022 has served as a model for our state and will save lives. We also want to acknowledge and honor the brave survivors of gun violence who keep coming forward to tell their painful stories and keep doing the hard work of advocating for an end to gun violence. As the statistics cited in the proclamation show, there is still much more work to do. Boulder Moms Demand Action thanks the Boulder City Council for its continued attention to this issue, and we look forward to continuing our work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Declaration? All right, thank you all.
All right, and our third and final declaration of the evening is for the Sync's 100th anniversary, and it is my honor to present this one. Okay, the Sync 100th anniversary, June 14, 2023. So the Sync restaurant is celebrating its 100th anniversary this year, a significant milestone for one of our city's most iconic establishments. A beloved spot for locals to gather, eat, and drink for the past 100 years. It has also played an essential role in building and showcasing Boulder's personality as a university town and foodie destination. Over the years, the Sync has been a hotspot for University of Colorado Boulder students, from notable alumni like Robert Redford working as a janitor to being featured in films like Woody Allen's Sleeper. The Sync has been an integral part of college student experiences in Boulder. The Sync's famous Sync Burger has been recognized by numerous national publications like Thrillist, Zagat, and Food Network. The Sync has also been featured on Food Network's Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives and Man vs. Food, putting Boulder's culinary scene in the national spotlight. I'm starting to get hungry. Did you guys bring anything? This cozy burger restaurant and bar has been a part of Boulder's history for 100 years, and its unique architecture and colorful art-covered walls make it an attraction for visitors. The Sync's storied history includes transforming from a college bar to a well-loved deli, then into a vibrant restaurant, attracting notable visitors such as President Barack Obama, Madeleine Albright, and many others. The Sync has also played a role as a community convener and as a must-see for tourists. It is one of the longest-running businesses in Boulder and has been a focal point of the Hill for generations. Past and present owners, Mark and Chris Heinrichs, have given endless hours and expertise on various community boards. The Sync is one of the largest employers of Imagine participants and a longtime supporter of University Hill Elementary. So we, the City Council of the City of Boulder, Colorado, recognize and celebrate June 14th, 2023 as the 100th anniversary of the Sync and appreciate the institutions, its owners' engagement in our community, and its contributions to Boulder's cultural heritage. We underscore the importance of local restaurants like the Sync that contribute to our thriving communities and economies. So thank you and congratulations. I'll give you a chance to say a couple words.
Well, we just want to say thank you for having us in the community. It's really been an honor to be part of the long and storied history of the Sync, and for over 30 years, Chris and I have been shepherding it along until has joined us recently to join the ownership, and it's just really an honor to be part of the city. So thank you.
Fantastic. Do you have anything coming up?
So, yeah, thanks. So on June 14th, we're going to have our historic documentary shown at the Boulder Theater. And then over the summer, we'll have a FAC party on the last Friday of each month on September 2nd. We're going to have a street party. And then in late September, we're going to open an installation at the Boulder Museum. So,
fantastic. Look forward to seeing this.
Thank you.
All right. And with that, we will now move into our open comment period. So if we could have Brenda please go over our public participation guidelines.
Good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be back on virtual space in council chambers to provide you with information about our public and open comment periods this evening. So if Emily, you could share the slide, that would be great. The city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports the physical and emotional safety of community members, staff, and council members, as well as supporting democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experience, and political perspectives. There is more information about this vision and about the community engagement process that we use to arrive at this vision online. If you go to bouldercolorado.gov and type productive atmospheres into the search box, you will find everything and more that you might want to know about that process. Next slide, please. And the following are examples of rules of decorum found. I'm going to move to my other screen so it'll look like I am not looking at you, but I am. I just can't read the type. The following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and in other guidelines that support this vision, and we will uphold these tonight during this meeting. All remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters relating to city business, and during our public hearings to the specific topic of the public hearing. No participant shall make threats or other forms of intimidation toward any other person. Obscenity, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the ability to conduct the meeting is prohibited. Participants are required to sign up to speak using the name you are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. If you do plan to speak tonight and you appear online, I will let you know if your name does not appear as it is registered, and then we can get it changed for you. In-person participants are asked to refrain from expressing support or disagreement verbally or with applause, with the exception of declarations as you've seen tonight. Traditionally, support is shown silently through American Sign Language applause, or sometimes we call them jazz hands. So we appreciate you giving me a moment to read through these again. I know some of you have heard them before, and we appreciate your patience. And I think we are ready to move into the in-person portion of open comment, and then we'll go to virtual. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brenda. All right, we've got 5 people here in person and 4 virtually. Each of you will have 2 minutes. I'll announce 3 names at a time, and if you can get ready to speak, please. So our first 3 in-person speakers are Darcy Lopez, Evan Ravitz, and Phoenix Liu.
Hello there. My name is Darcy Lopez. I am the union steward at Table Mesa King Soopers, and I am on the negotiations committee for JCFW Local 7. Grocery store workers help feed the community. We go to work through pandemics, natural disasters, and wait at bus stops when it is 17 degrees below zero. We survive mass shootings, and we go back to work weeks after. We also live with our parents, family members, roommates, and partners in order to afford rent in Boulder. My son and I both work for King Soopers. We live in an 834 square foot apartment, and we don't have a car. $13.65 an hour means a 40-hour-a-week employee qualifies for housing and food assistance in Boulder, and also can't afford takeout. There's a grocery store merger on the horizon that will be the largest grocery store merger in history. If the deal goes through, Kroger will own 6 of your grocery stores. We're talking about a company who we went on strike with, and we got the best collective bargaining deal in recent Kroger history. That being said, within 6 months after we got our raises, many of our workers' rents went up as much as $300 a month. The raises simply don't keep up with the raising cost of rent in this town. With the company anticipating the merger, hours at both Safeway and King Soopers are already on the chopping block. People working 50 to 60 hours a week at my store to pay their bills, which they shouldn't have to work 50 to 60 hours a week to pay their bills, they can't work overtime anymore, and many workers are not getting 40 hours a week. Meanwhile, we are all paying much higher prices at the grocery store. There's a rumor flying around that you're going to table this issue. Please do not table this issue. This is blowing us off and not taking it seriously.
Darcy, I apologize for your time's up. If you could email us the rest of your testimony, please, we'd love to hear it.
All I have to say that is, as a survivor of a mass shooting, tabling this issue is very disrespectful, and I take it personally.
Thank you.
Now is the time.
Very good. Evan Ravitz, then Phoenix Liu, and Sonia Bent.
Hi. There's one country in the world that for centuries has enjoyed more government by the people than all other nations put together, with people now voting 4 times a year on citizen ballot initiatives that anyone can get on the ballot, and voting a 5th time for candidates. That country is Switzerland, with one of the world's lowest poverty rates, the highest median net worth, and the highest newspaper readership, because people can do something about what they're reading. Their high-speed trains run on time, and the country avoids wars. Half the U.S. states also have direct democracy, but there is a simple reason it hasn't made us nearly as successful as Switzerland. It is much easier to get on the ballot in Switzerland than in any U.S. state for 2 reasons. 1, less signatures are required proportional to population in Switzerland than any U.S. state, about half as much as Colorado. The Swiss can leave petitions unattended in stores and offices, but here each person's signature must be witnessed and notarized, which in Colorado now costs about $2 million. Boulder's first in the country online petitioning solves the same problem, but with much better security, since people and politicians here couldn't be trusted with leaving petitions unattended as in Switzerland. Here, citizens are infantilized, not empowered, by deceitful and manipulative governments. The result is Trump and contempt for government. In 2018, oil and gas hired petitioner harassers, paid petition companies to stop petitioning, and hijacked petitions. Online petitioning solves all these problems and doesn't more. Stop obstructing it.
Thanks, Evan. Phoenix Liu, Sonia Bent, and Ruth Nowotny. Do we have Phoenix in the audience? Not seeing Phoenix. Let's go to Sonia Bent.
Good evening. My name is Sonia Bent.
Sonia, if you can speak into the mic.
I'm sorry?
Speak into the mic.
Okay, the time didn't start yet. Okay. Okay. Good evening. My name is Sonia Bent. I am here to speak about why a good neighbor agreement is necessary if a homeless center opens at 1844 Folsom. Alexander the Great said, "There is nothing impossible to him who will try." A good neighbor agreement is possible if we all try. Mark Wallach at the previous council meeting said, just because something is hard doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. The reason it is important to have a good neighbor agreement is because it will contain information about why the center will exist and what they will be doing, and address the concerns and expectations of residents and businesses. My point is, we need to set standards. We need to set rules, expectations, and consequences. We need to address the fear, anxiety, and distrust. A good neighbor agreement will allow all parties to work together. Kurt Fernhaber does not want to place the work into doing a good neighbor agreement because it is too hard, too time-consuming. Things may change, programs and impacts may change. These are not good reasons. That is why a good neighbor agreement is necessary if a homeless center opens at 1844 Folsom. I know, I live next door. My point is, Kurt can say XYZ today, and 6 months from now, he can change it. A good neighbor agreement will protect the community from this. If you were living next to a homeless center, would you want a good neighbor agreement? My guess is yes. Then follow the golden rule. Treat others as you would like to be treated. Please direct Kurt to do a good neighbor agreement. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sonia.
You're welcome.
Last in-person speaker is Ruth Nowotny.
Hello, my name is Ruth Nowotny. I am a rising junior at Boulder, and I am here because I am concerned for my community. Speaking on behalf of my interests and those of my college-aged peers, I believe it is of the utmost importance that the council addresses the wage practices in this area. It is widely understood that a college degree carries a price tag in the range of tens of thousands of dollars. It is normally expected that this financial undertaking will be offset with higher wages in the future. But it is becoming more clear that a college degree does not guarantee the security it once did. College students are struggling to make ends meet in this city, and as long as these business practices are allowed, more young people will be forced to choose between their basic necessities and their education. I believe that instituting a self-sufficient wage at $25 an hour is a good way to start. We are all aware that Boulder is an expensive place to live, and there is very little affordable housing for undergraduate non-freshmen. Raising the minimum wage would benefit working students who are struggling to pay the rent. MIT reports that the living wage for a single person with no children in Boulder County is $20.60 an hour. The U.S. Census in 2020 found that the average monthly rent for one person in Boulder is approximately $1,700. Therefore, if I was working 40 hours a week, 48 hours a year, before tax, I would be spending approximately 52% of my annual earnings on rent alone. But I'm a student and I'm unable to work full-time since I am pursuing a degree. I'm not alone in this struggle either. In order to make the city more accessible for everyone, Boulder's wages must reflect its cost of living. Increasing the minimum wage in Boulder County would be an incredible step forward towards making a more equitable community. It would help mitigate the increasing financial burden that college poses and would allow for an overall better quality of life for all of our neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. All right, moving to our online speakers. Our first three are Carolyn Alerting, Lynn Siegel, and Kate Kelly. Carolyn, you're up.
This is Carolyn Alerting. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I would like to say that it would be premature and unnecessary to give up on raising the wage in 2024. The current minimum is unrealistic and unsustainable, given the cost of living. And last week, several dimensions of the wage issue received insufficient attention. First, the data-driven and well-precedented nature of the coalition's potential plans became buried beneath emphatic calls for prudence, more research, and community engagement, all good things that are in fact part of the coalition's ongoing work, which draws upon local data as well as studies from throughout the US. On this topic, there was a suggestion to hire an economist to perform a so-called independent analysis, ostensibly on the very same public data. Here, I urge Council to learn from recent missteps and avoid relying on expertise from any one person, particularly in a research area famous for the overrepresentation of white, male, and class privilege. Second, greater emphasis should have been placed on the incremental, legally regulated, and constantly self-reviewing nature of the plans under discussion. But reasonable remarks often pale in comparison with reactivity. Here I refer to the use of infantilizing language like the word phooey, ableist terms like crazy, and exaggerated and violent rhetoric describing the wage being, quote, rammed down throats. Finally, there was no discussion of the advantages to business. A higher wage alleviates turnover, a central problem in expensive locations like ours, particularly in hospitality industries, and a higher wage increases consumer spending. So please make this the City of Boulder's bottom line. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Carolyn. Now we have Lynn Siegel, Kate Kelly, and James Look.
Yeah, Lynn, you need to go back to 3 minutes each, 45 minutes. You need to hear from your public. My catalytic converter was stolen. That's $3,700. That's less money I have to pay in sales tax revenue to the City of Boulder. My homeowner's insurance went up from $1,500 to $3,500 in one fell swoop. I thought it was because 7 years ago I needed a roof, didn't get the roof put on. No, it's because of inflation. It's because of the state of Colorado. It's because of people not being paid enough in their jobs. As people have told you today, you need to raise the minimum wage. The rising tide brings all with it. Caroline Miller, you need to reconsider her. I don't know what the deal is with Open Space Board of Trustees. I think she's got a good gripe, and there are backdoor deals going on with the city of Boulder. I find that all the time with the city council. With regards to Xcel Energy, the rate increases, way not good. I testified yesterday. There was great testimony. Regards to my homeowners' taxes, property taxes, there's it went from 3,000 to 6,000 this year. It went from 900,000 to 1.34 million, and it's just not sustainable because these taxes go straight back into higher rents for the King Soopers people. You need to balance jobs and housing because the more people that are in service industry coming into town without balance, there's more and more of them. You're getting more and more LIHTC funds and federal tax subsidies and giving more and more lifting parking restrictions and height amendments to the big time developers in town that are building $3 and $4 million condos all over. This is not sustainable. It's not good for the city of Boulder, and you all know it. I say this at the risk of stating the obvious. Do the right thing. Bye.
Thank you, Lynn. Now we have Kate Kelly and then James Look.
Thank you, members of Boulder City Council. My name is Kate Kelly. I am the Boulder Lead Organizer for New Era, Colorado. As an organization that represents and works alongside the young people of Colorado, and as a young person myself, we believe that all people deserve the opportunity to thrive, not just survive. Setting a regional minimum wage with an implementation by 2024 based on the self-sufficiency standard for Boulder County will empower young people with the financial security to live and build community in Boulder. The current statewide pay is nowhere near enough for someone to support themselves in this county. With the skyrocketing pace of rent, the crushing weight of student debt, and juggling competing schedules between school and work, young people are not able to keep up. For young people in this county, our research and data visualization map on housing affordability found that of the over 20,000 young households renting, 60% of those households are paying unaffordable rent, which is defined as rent that costs more than 30% of someone's income. Additionally, our polling data we led this year shows that young people often forgo many basic necessities such as groceries and healthcare in order to afford to keep a roof over their heads. No one should be forced to go hungry or ignore their medical needs in order to live in Boulder County. We do not have the privilege to wait for City Council to implement a minimum regional wage any longer. Young people need solutions now or risk their health and ability to call Boulder home. By raising the minimum wage, young people will be able to invest more where their life is. Young people are an integral part of this community, and they need a city council who represents their needs. In our 2021 Youth Agenda Listening Tour, money was noted as the most common barrier for young people to not being more involved in their communities. How much you make should not determine the level of involvement you get to have where you live. Young people are revolutionary, and their vision of the world and the drive they possess is one that benefits whole communities. Do not be mistaken, young people are paying attention, and it's opportunities such as these where they can see who champions the issues that impact them. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kate. Our last speaker tonight is James Look.
Good evening, Council. I have a short statement regarding the use of motorized e-bikes in the very specific area surrounding Wonderland Lake. While e-bikes may be appropriate on trails east of Broadway with relatively flat and open terrain, they are not suitable for the Wonderland Lake area. The Wonderland Lake paths already have significant pedestrian traffic, especially small children, strollers, leashed pets, and joggers. I do not believe that the typical e-bike user will differentiate between areas where e-bikes are permitted and not permitted. Therefore, it is highly likely that if e-bikes are approved for any portion of the Wonderland Lake trail system, they will be used throughout this area. My concern is primarily with preserving the public safety. E-bikes, due to the increased weight, may have difficulty achieving reasonable stopping distances. Increased stopping distances and reduced maneuverability may pose an unreasonable risk to pedestrians, especially in crowded environments, which might include tourists and visitors unfamiliar with the area. The combination of increased speeds, limited visibility on the trails, and potential unanticipated interactions with children and pets creates hazardous situations that can be reasonably anticipated. Allowing e-bikes on Wonderland Lake paths with significant existing pedestrian traffic could increase the likelihood of accidents, potentially resulting in legal claims for the failure to provide a safe environment for pedestrians despite the known risks. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, James. And just to note, we're actually going to have our public hearing on e-bikes a little bit later, but we will keep your comments in mind when we get to that point. Okay, so that concludes open comment. I'll turn to staff to see if there are any staff responses.
No, I just want to thank people. A lot of different topics brought today, and I wanted to thank Sonia for your comments. I want you to know, and I know that the topic of the Day Services Center has been one. I want to thank council members Yates and Weiner, who have met with community along with staff. I heard that was really productive, and we will continue, and my commitment is to continue to talk with community and to neighbors to make sure that we are moving forward in a way that understands the issues and the concerns, and we're trying to address them as best as possible. So thank you.
Great. No comment. Very good. Any city council comments? Well, I guess I'll just throw in one. Appreciate the folks who came to speak about the minimum wage tonight. Your comments are well taken. We did discuss this at our study session last week. There was some disagreement, but I think, Nira, correct me if I'm wrong, we are working on the topic of the minimum wage. It looks like implementation is coming in what kind of a time frame?
We are. I think from the direction that we got from council is to continue to move forward. There is support for our continued work with the consortium. We were asked to then go back and scope what it would look like to move this forward, and what timing and what lift that would be to create this and put this, as this is now on the work plan. So we will come back to council with a scope. And that scope will depend on what ability our partners may have to support some of the work, so that it's not obviously just City of Boulder, since City of Boulder cannot enact on its own a regional minimum wage. It really is done with our partners. And so that work is ongoing, and we will be bringing it back to council. I don't know the exact date, but I will certainly follow up with council and let you know.
Thanks for that. All right, well, thanks again to everyone who came and spoke to us this evening. And we will now move to our consent agenda. Elisha, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Our consent agenda is item 3 on tonight's agenda, and it consists of items 3A through 3G.
Any questions or comments on the consent agenda?
Fair enough, it's okay. I'll move the consent agenda.
Duly moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. If we could have a roll call, please, Elisha.
Yes, sir. Thank you. We'll start tonight's roll call with Councilmember Weiner.
Yes.
Yates.
Yes.
Benjamin.
Yes.
Mayor Brockett.
Yes.
Councilmember Folkerts.
Yes.
Friend.
Yes.
Joseph.
Yes.
Spear.
Yes.
The consent agenda items A through G are hereby approved with a vote 8-0.
Right, thanks very much. So if we can move to our call-up check-in, please.
Yes, sir. Our call-up check-ins are item 4 on tonight's agenda. 4A is the call-up consideration of a review and comment on the proposed site development plan for New Vista High School, proposing to replace the existing school building at 700 20th Street with a new approximately 74,000 square foot, 2-story high school. New sports field, an enlarged parking lot, and updated access. This is reviewed under case number LUR 2023-00017.
Thank you. And I believe we have a short presentation on this.
We do, and Shannon is virtual with us today, so I will pass it on to her.
Great, thank you so much. Good evening, council members. I'm Shannon Moeller, the case manager for this item in the Planning and Development Services Department. So I'll just provide a quick overview of the call-up being considered tonight. This particular review is being done pursuant to state statute and not through the city's typical review processes. Colorado Revised Statutes 2232-124 listed here requires the Board of Education of a school district to submit a site development plan for review and comment to the Planning Commission or governing body of a municipality prior to construction of a new building. State law doesn't further describe the process or specify the review criteria, so staff has approached this review process similar to a concept plan, using the typical review criteria and focusing on the policy considerations in the BVCP. So similar to a concept plan, no approval or denial is being taken on the item. The property is a 12.5-acre site located northwest of the intersection of Broadway and Baseline. It contains the existing New Vista High School facility, including existing buildings, parking, and recreational fields. The underlying BVCP comp plan land use is primarily public, reflecting the current high school use, and the zoning is RH5, where public schools are allowed by right. The proposal is a replacement of the existing building with a new 74,000 square foot, 2-story building. The school district has determined that the existing building is no longer able to adequately serve the needs of the high school population. The replacement building would be located adjacent to the existing building, and following completion of the new building, the existing building would be demolished. The parking area in the southwest corner of the site would also be updated with a new one-way pickup and drop-off lane, updated access points, additional parking, and new bike parking. At the planning board hearing on May 16th, the board thanked the school district for their presentation and for sharing their decision-making process, and they provided feedback on the site development plan, including on the proposed energy-efficient school design, the proposed site layout, and the proposed vehicular parking changes. The board approved a motion to draft a letter to the PVSD Board of Education that would incorporate the staff memo and summarize and note the board's input on the school design. A final draft of that letter will be transmitted to the school district following the planning board's review of the May 16th meeting minutes. So in terms of the review process, the city can review and comment on this proposal per state statute, but it is not a decision-making body on the item. The school district is not required to undergo a site review process and is not subject to the typical review processes under the city's land use code. New construction, remodeling, and renovation of schools is permitted through the state and not through the city. If council chose to call up this item, a public hearing would be scheduled at an upcoming meeting, and representatives from the school district are here tonight should council have any specific questions on this item. And that concludes the staff presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Shannon. Questions for staff? Okay. So seeing none for staff, I just would invite a school board or school district representative, if you wanted to say a couple words to us, feel free, or we may have a question or two for you. Is somebody present from the school district?
Yes, they are. We're just needing to promote them.
Okay.
Should be joining us panelists now.
Yeah, good evening. I just got in. This is Chris Stoppenhagen. I'm the Executive Director of the Bond with Boulder Valley School District.
Thanks for joining us, Chris. Lauren, did you say you had a question for the applicant?
Well, and just because this is a call-up, one of the things that I, looking through this application, one of the things that struck me is that, you know, New Vista is a, you know, has kind of an inspiring educational model that isn't typical. And to me, this building didn't quite match that level of inspiration. And I was wondering if the applicant might be willing to have conversations with our design advisory board or transportation board to help, you know, push forward both the design aspects and the sustainability aspects. I think that our boards have really great ideas on a lot of those things, and that conversation could be fruitful.
Yeah, so we have gone through a lot of iterations of design. This started back in 2021 with a committee group talking about the future of New Vista. We talked about what would be the best option moving forward. Would this be, renovating, restoring the building that was not really found to be costly or sustainable? And we've gone through design iterations for, higher sustainability. We think we have a very high energy efficient and good sustainable building. We are at right now nearing 100% construction documents. I think it would be difficult to, at this point, entertain different design ideas, but we would be, happy to share what those efficiencies are.
If you're near, I guess I'm now curious about the timing of coming in front of council. If you're near 100% design documents, it doesn't feel like it makes this conversation feel very performative.
I would agree with you. We were asked to come forward with and present to council, or I guess be here for these questions. We haven't experienced this before, so maybe Shannon can speak to that more.
Shannon, can you weigh in on the timing, perhaps, of when this review with Planning Board and Council is happening?
Yeah, I think that the city had been communicating with the school district regarding the state statutes and what's required under those, and had communicated back and forth a bit about that and determined that it was an item that needed to go through this process. And so when we received the requested documents, we tried to move it forward as quickly as possible to Planning Board and through the process. And that's why it's before you tonight.
Sure. Nicole. And then I got Matt.
I just wanted to follow up a little bit on Lauren's question. Chris, my oldest child was at Creekside when that school was being redone. And if I'm remembering correctly, that process had a ton of engagement from the school community. Has that already happened at this stage, so that folks in the school, parents, students, teachers have already weighed in on this?
Absolutely, it has. This started back, like I said, in 2021. We went through a lengthy process that involved students, parents, community members, district leadership, principals, staff. We had meetings and evaluations of outside groups on the site and the building, and this was unanimously voted once presented to the Board of Education and the committee members that this was the route to go.
And sorry, and when you say this is the route to go, do you mean these specific design documents or something higher level?
For the replacement of the building. And we are in consistent communication with community and in the district on design and how we're proceeding.
Because I think maybe our questions are a little bit more about the specifics of the design rather about the kind of larger decision about replacing the building.
Yeah, we've had design advisory team meetings throughout the whole process. We've been in design for well over a year. And so, yes, everybody has been fully in the know and weighed in on the design process.
I've got Matt queued up, and then Matt, do you want to go ahead? And then I've got Tara and then Rachel.
Appreciate that, Aaron.
Rachel.
I'm gonna sort of follow where Lauren was. I think her questions were poignant, but Chris, some of your last statements I think are a little concerning for me. That community has weighed in, and there's been a lot of that dialogue. This is the first we're hearing about it, so I'm a little concerned that we, as the representatives of 107,000 people, are hearing about this when it's at 100% completion, and that doesn't feel like there's been that type of outreach to where the broader community. Again, you're a sovereign state entity, and we respect that. But we have partners at the university that also do their work, but we're brought in at a much earlier level, just to sort of have that conversation, make sure we're all on the right page, trying to build a really good, sustainable, well-looking community. And so I think there's just a few red flags that sort of come up there, and I'll sort of echo where, again, my colleague, Councilmember Folkerts was sort of pushing. And I guess the question is why, we're talking, there's going to be some design questions here. It seems moot, obviously, but why didn't the district push the envelope? Because it seems like it doesn't meet the Boulder Valley Comp Plan in terms of our general design standards, in terms of how we're trying to push the envelope, and it doesn't also seem to meet BVSD's green plan when you look at that. And so I'm just sort of wondering why we didn't, if we're building this for the next 50 to 70 years, why does it seem like it's building something that was form and factor from 20 years ago, not something that's for tomorrow and the next generation?
And Matt, there's where I'll say it does follow the Boulder Valley School District's green building principles that were adopted by the Board of Education. And we have engaged community. We have a constant communication. We have a bond page. There is communication and engagement throughout the school, throughout the community surrounding that. I do apologize you haven't been involved with that, but we do work hard at communicating our processes and involving the community.
Okay, thanks for that, Chris. I guess we'll just need to keep in mind as council that BVSD is a separate. I know I'm getting to you. Is a separate entity, right? So this is not something where we have control over telling them what to do, but hopefully there is the potential for us to have a few comments that might be considered even at this late stage. Obviously not redoing the building entirely, but perhaps there are some thoughts that could be taken into account. With that in mind, I'll go to Rachel.
Thanks, and thanks for being here. And I'm not sure I have the right numbers because we are getting information a little late and some of my questions weren't answered, but my big concern reading our packet was the number of parking spots and planning boards concerns around those. And so I would like to know if my numbers are right. Was it 150 or 160 parking spots possibly for about 300 student enrollment?
It's actually 117. That's including the electric vehicle charging stations, the disabled parking spaces. And in the zone by Boulder, parking standards 9-9-6, with 1 to 300, we would actually be really permitted to build around 250. So we're well below the threshold. And the point of the parking lot is really to right size it for the usage right now. And we've done traffic studies on this as well to allow for lower queue going in and out of school, better traffic flow. And it was really important to us to maintain the partnership for the Chautauqua shuttle, which will not be interrupted during any of the construction process that we have. And so a lot of consideration was taken into the parking lot and the size, the design.
And how many students are at New Vista?
It's 300, just over 300. Your numbers are pretty accurate.
And I guess when I look at it, I think, maybe roughly half the kids don't have driver's licenses yet. So 150 potential drivers if every student drove with 120 spots, including faculty. It just seems like a lot of parking.
Faculty, staff, support staff, in and out, and volunteers. Yeah. I mean, the parking lot is pretty jammed. If you've been there during pickup or drop off, and parking spots are of a premium.
And I get that it's more of a regional school where people, kids are going to be coming from places like Superior and Lafayette. So I get that it may need more parking, but if memory serves, it doubled the amount of parking at a time when we're really looking to encourage people not to drive. And so having almost a school with about one parking spot per student seems just missing the mark to, as Matt said, build something for 70 years from now when we know we're trying to move the other way. It doesn't sit quite well with me. So I don't know that it does meet sort of the loftier goals that we have as a city, a county, and as a school system. So I don't know if there's value in calling this up. I guess I don't know if that's maybe a question for Shannon. What will happen if we call this up, given that we don't have any power here?
My understanding is the school district isn't obligated to make changes to the design. It would be something that we could incorporate and provide feedback on, but it's not necessarily a requirement, is my understanding.
Those are all my questions.
Great. So let's see if we can get close to finishing here. I have a couple specific comments, but does anyone have a desire to call this up, which is our kind of approximate question here tonight? Lauren?
Yeah, while we can't affect, require changes to this process, I do think that given that this is sort of the only chance we have at making some requests and understanding it in detail, if they were willing to meet with our boards and commissions, I think I would prefer that, but I don't hear that willingness. And so for that reason, and because, you know, schools tend to have a pretty, you know, this is going to be something that's in our community in an important place for the next 50 years at least. I would like to have a motion, or I would like to call it up.
Okay. Fair enough. Rachel?
If that's a motion, I would like to second it. I'm also interested. And it would also point out that it's just at a very kind of prime intersection right near Chautauqua. And I understand that we have city involvement with the shuttle and stuff. So yeah, given this is our one chance, I'd be interested in learning more, maybe have a couple more questions answered. And also maybe we have a chance to sort of telegraph to the school board or whoever does have power to vote on this that they might want to look at some of the changes that we're interested in.
Lauren, do you mind phrasing it in the form of a motion, just so we...
I make a motion to call this item up.
And then, so Rachel, did you want to second that?
I do second.
Okay. And Bob? And then
I'm going to support the motion as well. I'm hearing enough concern from my colleagues. I realize that the school board and the school district doesn't necessarily need to listen to what we have to offer, but it sounds like we have some things to offer, and I hope they do listen. And I think this is, for the reasons that Lauren stated, it's an important enough project that I think we should weigh in. It's important to the community. It's a building that will be here. The last one was here for 70 years. The next one may be here for 70 years. So let's make sure to get it right. I'm sure the architects and the designers have worked diligently on this according to whatever standards the school district has, but I think we'd like to weigh in with our community standards as well.
Nicole?
I'm not going to support calling this up just because having seen how the district has gone through with one of these complete school rebuilds in the past and the amount of work that comes from the folks in the schools, the teachers, the students, the families who are there, I am comfortable moving forward knowing that the folks within the community who are going to be using this building have weighed in.
I'll call on myself here if I may. So I appreciate the comments that have been made. I think given where the design is in the process, I don't know that we would affect much by calling it up. So I'm not going to support the motion. I am going to take, Chris, if you don't mind, I'm going to take the opportunity to offer a couple specific comments. And if we end up calling it up, I'll say them again then. But
yes, absolutely. And I just want to say is what I heard, would we be willing to change the design if we wanted to meet with your members, your design team? And I'm happy to meet with them and hear the input. I just want to make it clear how close we are to completing design documents. So thank you.
Thanks for that. So my couple specific comments are, I guess I heard your point about why you've engineered the parking lot the way you've done. It does still seem like a lot of parking. And one thing that I feel like there's a little low on is the bike parking. It seems like there could be the opportunity for substantial additional bike parking. But my biggest comment would just be to give additional circulation opportunities for students arriving by foot and by bicycle. It does seem like they're a little bit on the margins of the driveway right now as I read the plans. So if there's perhaps an opportunity to include some dedicated arrival and exit points for cyclists and pedestrians, I think that could be really valuable. I am the proud parent of a former New Vista High School student. I know what great work it does for its kids. And my kid did take the bus home most days, so was leaving on foot a lot. So those are my primary comments. Anything else before we go to a vote?
Do I have an opportunity to respond to that?
Please, yes, please.
So those are owner furnished, and those are really at this point just kind of spots designated where we can put. Those aren't solidified right now.
Okay.
And we are looking at supplying whatever number. I mean, we're still working with the school on this, where we want to put these, how many we want to put. So that access that you speak of and the number, again, we're not at 100%. We're close. We've still got a couple weeks to go, but we are still looking at that and plan on still evaluating and adding more.
Great. Well, maybe you can keep those comments in mind as you move to that point. Tara.
Hey, Chris. I can't see that far, but because we might never talk again, I'm just going to say one comment. I might as well while I can, since who knows if we'll ever meet. And that is, I was thinking about Boulder High School, the kids, and they were complaining that their bikes get stolen a fair amount after school. And I'm wondering if you would consider, because we would love to get kids on bikes, if you would consider safe and secure ways to lock up your bike. So looking into some of the newer...
It's really off topic.
I know, it's off topic. I'll never talk to you again. So I'm going to talk to you some other time about it, to just keep it in mind, okay? All right.
Absolutely.
Thanks. We're not related to this school site.
No,
Great
I
points,
meant
though.
at this school I
At
meant
this-
it for
you mean
this school.
I thought you were talking about Boulder High. Please
No.
finish.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So what I was saying is for New Vista, which, by the way, I live right near there, and I would love to see some new and innovative ways for the kids to lock up their bikes now that we have the opportunity to look into that. Because I know it's a concern for some of the kids, and it's not easy for them to keep buying new bikes if their bikes get stolen.
And we at the school district have the same interest.
That's a great comment, and I apologize for misunderstanding.
It's a good thing I forgive you.
I know. Thanks. Okay, so can we? Yes, Lauren.
In case I don't. In case my motion doesn't pass, I would like to make a couple of comments about what I would like to see on the design side. So, as several people mentioned, the parking space count, I do have concerns about that being, it feels high to me. The connection to the bike path, I would really like to see a connection that goes more from the multi-use path to the school itself. That seems like right now the connection is across the north side of the property and is pretty circuitous. It seems like there would be an opportunity to make that connection at the south side of the property instead. I would also, you mentioned that the building is sustainable, but there are things like the boiler's a 95% efficient boiler, which is nothing special in today's construction standards, right? That's typical or below the bar. I would strongly encourage to look at geothermal heating and cooling, or and also structural systems that would provide carbon storage such as mass timber, along with solar panels and sod replacement where possible. Thank you.
Okay, and I got Matt, or Jeannie hasn't spoken yet, so Jeannie, if you want to give a quick comment, we'll go to Matt, and then we'll go to a vote.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I will be in support of the call-up check-in, so thank you for making your comments, Lauren. Thank you.
Matt?
Thanks, Aaron. I think doesn't surprise any of us. We have an exceptionally full docket for the next few months on our regular business meetings. So at least my concern is calling this up. Sure, I'm interested, but I don't know what we bump and how we squeezed in. We are literally full to the brim, and so I think my saying yes to a call up would be really contingent on, are we able to start really converting some future study sessions to really start to get through some of the business that we've committed to our community to get done here before this particular council's time is up. So my yes is kind of on that. Are we going to be really converting study sessions to make room for this conversation, so we're not doing 5-hour council meetings between now and November?
Okay, and with it, Rachel.
I would just say that I don't believe this council has yet scheduled any extra meetings. Like, we used to have some when we met on Tuesdays and Thursday meetings. So if we need to make some space for things like this, I think we can come in on an occasional Tuesday.
Okay, we'll leave that to CAC, but Jeannie?
You've just said you'd leave it to CAC. Well, I mean, the city manager's here. She could chime in as well as to whether that would add undue pressure to the city itself. Thank you.
I would say the extra meetings are something that happen during the course of any term. We would certainly try to accommodate that as much as possible. We would also be committed to looking at those study sessions that we have coming up, and if there's something that we can do by way of an IP, we are happy to do that as well to make space, as long as that's understood in terms of what the priorities are. So we can certainly accommodate that if that is the will of council.
Okay, thanks. And with that, if we can move to a vote, I believe this is a show of hands, yes? Okay. All in favor of the motion on the table? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? All not in favor? Right, so that passes 6-2. Chris, thanks for your attendance here tonight. It sounds like we got another hearing coming up before too long, and we'll be working with you all at BVSD to get that scheduled. And
kind of related, this is probably directed to Nuria or maybe to Brad, I don't know if Brad's in the room. I kind of like to know, not tonight, but at some point in time, how we got into the place we are tonight, because we're obviously very uncomfortable about the place that where the school district comes in at virtually 100% design, and we're being asked whether we want to call it up or not. So something got missed there. Either the school district waited too long to talk to our staff, or our staff waited too long to talk to us, but a ball was dropped, and I'd like to know why.
I appreciate that. I'll just note that the Director of Planning and Development Services is on a well-deserved vacation, so he is not here. But I will certainly circle back with staff and provide you with that information in terms of timing and provide some clarity. Happy to do so.
Thank you.
Okay, well, Chris, thanks again for your time tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, and with that, if we can move to our first public hearing, please. But Rachel, did you have a follow-up? Oh, yeah. Why don't we read it into the record, and then I'll turn to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Our public hearings are item 5 on tonight's agenda. 5A is the second reading and consideration of a motion to adopt the following ordinances that would amend the Boulder Revised Code to allow e-biking on certain open space trails. We first have the staff recommended ordinance, which is ordinance 8575, and then we have the OSBT recommended ordinance, which is 8576.
And before I turn to city staff, Rachel, if you'd like to.
I'm going to recuse and go home. So have a great meeting, everyone.
All right. See you later. Oh. Okay, well then, Nuri, if you could get us started, please.
Thank you, Mayor. And first of all, I just wanted to thank, we have gotten a lot of emails, as have you, on the topic. It's an important topic for this community, and want to thank everyone for the time and the thoughtfulness, for the information, for the perspective shared. I will send this to our Director of Open Space and Mountain Parks for a preliminary framing or a conversation as we kick it off.
Great. Thank you, Nuria. Good evening, Council. Dan Burke, Director of Open Space and Mountain Parks. And while our staff, Casey French and Marnie Ratzel, get settled in, they're going to be taking over the bulk of the presentation and facilitating some discussion with Council for this item. But with that, I just want to provide some high-level context setting. And first, I'd like to just point out that, you know, as land managers and those responsible for open space system, we are very cognizant and obviously daily aware of the fact that our system is very dynamic. And there's changes that are happening. Sometimes they're subtle and they happen over time out on our system, and sometimes these changes might be more dramatic and happen in the moment's notice, such as in the case of fire and flood. But it's the dynamic nature of our open space system that really demands that as stewards that we remain vigilant and really able to adaptively manage those changes based on the circumstances that we're seeing. And sometimes these changes don't necessarily happen on our system. They may be happening externally, but yet they impact our management decision-making nonetheless. And that is really in the case of e-bikes, for there's been some significant changes over the course of the past few years in regards to the definition and the management of e-bikes externally off of our system that do impact us as land managers of the open space system. And that is really one of the reasons why we're here tonight. It's been nearly a decade since we last visited you about open e-bike use on open space. And so those changes that have happened over the last few years is one of the reasons why we would like to come and revisit that discussion with you a decade later about e-bikes on open space. I also just want to acknowledge the fact that the staff's recommendation has not been aligned with the Open Space Board of Trustees' recommendation. And I want to point that out and acknowledge that. It's the first time in my 5 years of tenure as director that the board and the staff has sort of, quote unquote, failed to come together in a unified recommendation to council. And of course, we always strive to do so. And in this case, that was not the outcome. And I want to acknowledge that. It's one of those topics that open space system sometimes generates where there's strong opinions within community, within the board and the staff, and even the board themselves was split on this matter. And of course, we heard from a wide variety of community members on all sides of the fence on this. And I personally respect and I can understand all the different opinions that came forward throughout the year that we've had these discussions. So with that, I just want to say that we strive to come in unity with our board, and this is one of those examples where we just weren't able to come to that conclusion. And so after you hear from staff, we will have an opportunity to hear from board members as well. So with that, Casey and Marnie are going to walk us through a presentation that as staff, we really feel like after hearing from community, after hearing from all 5 of our trustees, after hearing from our staff, that I feel our recommendation strikes a reasonable and balanced approach to this matter. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Marnie Ratzel.
Good evening, Council. I'm glad to be here tonight. Thank you. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. Good evening, Council. I'm Marnie Ratzel, Principal Planner and the Project Manager for this effort. And I'm joined tonight by Casey French, the Planning and Design Senior Manager for OSMP, who's going to be co-presenting with me this evening. So as you know, tonight's agenda item is to consider an ordinance to allow e-biking on open space trails. And I want to give you a quick overview of what's on deck for Council to make an informed decision on this item. First, we've got the staff presentation, and then we have 2 members of the Open Space Board of Trustees who are going to speak briefly about the board's feedback on the staff recommendation. Next, we'll answer any clarifying questions from council members before we open it up for a public hearing to invite community feedback. And then we'll be ready for your council deliberation on the item before you. First, I'm going to kick it off with giving council members an overview of the background and the planning process. And then I'll turn it over to Casey, who will step through the staff recommendation. And then I'll wrap it up with a couple of the management alternatives that we considered. So for the background, Dan kind of teed us up a little bit. The city began allowing e-bikes on paved multi-use paths that comprise the Boulder's Greenway and Transportation System in 2014. The local ordinance that's been in place has continued to prohibit e-bikes on open space managed trails and also requires disposal of open space land to another city department or a partner agency to allow e-biking. In 2017, state law amended the definition and regulation of e-bikes to no longer classify them as a motor vehicle, and also allows both Class 1 and Class 2 e-bikes on multi-use trails unless prohibited by a local ordinance. Because Boulder has a local ordinance that was adopted in 2014, the state law didn't impact the city's open space trails. However, many of our neighboring land managers assessed and now allows e-bikes on some of their open space trails. Of note is that several OSMP trails are interconnected with the city's greenway and transportation multi-use paths, as well as regional trails managed and maintained by Boulder County Parks and Open Space, who allows e-bikes on their plains trails. Additionally, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service manages trails on Rocky Flats National Wildlife Refuge, which will connect Boulder County's trail system as part of the planned Rocky Mountain Greenway and Colorado Front Range trails. So this map is a map from Boulder County, and it shows which trails e-biking are currently allowed and not allowed on. So what you see here is the green trails allow e-bikes, and those are managed by our partner agencies. And the red trails are city open space land, are on city open space land managed by OSMP. And as you can see, our trails are interconnected with Boulder County and other city-managed trails. The current inconsistency in regulations creates some operational challenges for the department, as well as for visitor compliance. Some examples are the Lobo and IBM connector trails, where OSMP trails cross back and forth between jurisdictions and contribute to challenges with visitors with visitor experience and trail users knowing, understanding, and complying with inconsistent regulations. So the primary objectives of allowing e-biking on open space trails include improved access for community members of more ages and abilities to enjoy open space trails, providing consistent visitor experiences across interconnected trails where e-bike regulations currently differ, more adaptive management by considering alternatives to disposal of open space managed lands, and supporting broader city climate goals by reducing the number of vehicle miles traveled to reach local trails, which would in turn help preserve ecosystems and habitats that make up city open space land. Okay, in terms of the planning process, OSMP's evaluation of e-bikes began about a year ago in the spring of 2022, and it included an engagement window over the summer, additional analysis in the fall, and consideration by the Open Space Board of Trustees in the winter. I'm just going to cover a few highlights of each phase of the process. Last spring, OSMP staff completed an activity assessment using the process in OSMP's Visitor Master Plan, which we call the VMP, and that's a planning document approved by Council in 2005. So the VMP outlines the set of considerations shown on the left side of your slide, and in assessing these considerations, staff determined that e-biking does not differ from biking and could be managed similarly to biking activity, which allows biking on designated trails. As such, we identified 3 management alternatives to not allowing e-bikes. Alternative A would allow e-bikes on all trails that allow biking, and that represents about 35% of OSMP's trail network. Alternative B would allow e-bikes on OSMP Plains trails, which are located east of the Broadway corridor, and it would also allow it on Boulder Canyon Trail. And this represents about 22% of OSMP's trail network. And Alternative C would allow e-bikes on interconnected multi-use trails that allow bikes, or 16% of the trail network. Having identified these, we next identified criteria to evaluate and develop preliminary ratings for each management alternative and the status quo option. So the alternatives were rated using a gradient scale from most to least in terms of meeting the criteria assessed that you see here on the slide. And this helped inform a preliminary staff proposal of Alternative B. Staff identified Alternative B as the preferred alternative because it best achieves the objectives. It increases opportunities for visitors of more ages and abilities to access and enjoy city open space, provides a consistent visitor experience and regulations which are easy to understand, comply with, and enforce, and may contribute to city climate goals with minimal impacts to natural resources, visitor experiences, visitor safety, and the trail system. In the summer, OSMP shared the management alternatives and the preliminary proposal with the community during an engagement window. We gathered community input through 2 different survey instruments. First, we had an online engagement questionnaire that was posted to Be Heard Boulder, and it received over 2,300 responses, which, as I understand it, still is the highest response rate the city has received on a public engagement survey to date. Additionally, OSMP staff conducted an on-site intercept survey at a subset of open space trails. And as you can see, the overall results of both surveys indicate that a majority of respondents support e-biking on open space trails over not allowing e-bikes. In terms of management alternatives, the online engagement indicated support for the preliminary staff proposal of Alternative B. And open space visitors that responded to the intercept survey had preferences that were more evenly distributed, with a slightly higher proportion indicating a preference toward Alternative A. Next, in the fall, staff shared the community feedback with the Open Space Board of Trustees, And at that time, the board requested the additional information that you see here to support their consideration of a final recommendation. Some of these items included several comparisons of the survey data, a summary of unique ideas that we heard from the community, more information on enforcement and trail and e-bike characteristics. So next, staff presented a staff recommendation to the Open Space Board of Trustees comprised of two components. The first was a policy recommendation to City Council to allow Class 1 and Class 2 e-biking as a passive recreational use and allowed only on certain trails as designated. And the second was to provide feedback to the department on the, regarding the on-the-ground management approach to implement the policy, and a staff preferred alternative to designate and manage e-biking on trails identified as alternative B. As Dan talked about in his introduction, the board considered the staff recommendation over the winter, and they made several motions that resulted in a split vote among board members. The motion that passed did not support the staff recommendation as presented. Instead, it recommended that council make a finding that operation of an e-bike is not a passive recreational use on open space land, but that e-biking would be allowed on open space trails only to enable connectivity and contiguity where a multi-jurisdictional regional trail requires access to a segment of open OSMP managed trail. So to develop the staff recommendation presented to council, OSMP considered several factors. In addition to community and board input, we also considered peer agency experience, the department's experience with biking, and results of the management alternatives evaluation. And ultimately, the department continues to support a recommendation comprised of a policy change to allow Class 1 and Class 2 e-bikes as a passive recreational use on certain open space trails were designated by the department, and to implement the policy by designating and managing trails outlined in Alternative B, which includes plains trails that allow biking and the Boulder Canyon Trail. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Casey to share more about the staff recommendation.
Thanks, Marnie. So first, I'm going to speak a bit to how the staff recommendation is organized. So as Marnie said, it's organized into two parts. And the first part is the policy decision of allowing e-biking on open space, and this requires council approval. And it has recommended ordinance language associated with it. And then the second part has to do with where the department implements the policy. So the second part is not part of the ordinance language. And this is because the on-the-ground management actions, or the where, it doesn't require council approval, but we are very interested in seeking council input to the department on that. Another reason for this approach is that guidance on policy is generally more static in nature, while the on-the-ground management actions, in this case the trails designated for e-biking, might benefit from an ability to more easily adaptively manage in the future. So in terms of how to make these policy and on-the-ground management changes, I'm going to go step by step through the staff recommendation, or the process on the how. And there are 4 steps related to changing the policy, which includes a legislative finding, repealing the existing ordinance, and then amending the code regulating vehicles and analog bikes, and to create a new ordinance. And I'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail in the upcoming slides. And then there's only one step to implement the policy, which is the departmental designation. So I'd like to start to explain the intention of the legislative finding. And I'm going to begin with some background on the charter. So Charter Section 176 states that open space land shall be used only for certain purposes, and one of those purposes is passive recreation. And the charter does not mention or allow for any exceptions to those uses, and it also does not define passive recreation. Passive recreation is defined in the council-approved OSMP Visitor Master Plan, or VMP, and it defines it as non-motorized activities that achieve the criteria that's listed here on this slide. And we recognize there's debate on whether e-biking meets the non-motorized component. So in support of the staff finding that e-biking meets the criteria here that's listed on this slide and in the VMP, Council could make a legislative finding that e-biking is a passive recreational activity. So the intention of the legislative finding is for Council to specifically find that e-biking is a passive recreational use of open space and that aligns with our policies. The benefit of this approach is that it explicitly draws a connection between allowing e-biking to our charter and the criteria in the VMP. Moving on to step 2, which is the recommendation to repeal Code Section 7525. This section of the code prohibits e-bikes and requires disposal of open space, and it must be either repealed or amended to support this policy change. The recommended approach is to repeal and replace instead of amending, because as indicated by the 7, the current code is located in Title 7, and this is the traffic code section of the VRC. Most other open space related codes and regulations are in Title 8, which is focused on open space management, so we think it would be better to relocate it there in Chapter 8. Steps 3 and 4 would make other changes to Title 8. Step 3 is to amend Section 836. This section currently regulates motor vehicles and analog bikes on open space lands, and staff recommends amending it to include regulation of e-bikes. And then step 4 is to add the new ordinance that contains the actual legislative finding to allow Class 1 and Class 2 e-bikes on certain designated trails. In terms of the implementation process to designate trails for e-biking, this is a function already designated to the OSMP department in Charter Section 171, A and B. And as we previously described, staff's preferred alternative is the Plains Trail and Boulder Canyon Trail. And in terms of adaptively managing, OSMP would continue the long-standing departmental practice of seeking input on major trail decisions in the future. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Marnie, and she's going to go over some other alternatives we considered, and then wrap it up.
Thank you, Casey. Other alternatives, the Open Space Board of Trustees recommended approach to reflect the motions made by the Open Space Board of Trustees. Staff prepared an alternative ordinance that's included as attachment B with your memo. We've identified some conflicts in the language passed in the OSBT motions, and these are currently reflected in the ordinance of 8576. These would need to be resolved if council's interested in pursuing the OSBT approach. We have described what those conflicts are, and I'm happy to walk through those suggested changes to ordinance 8576 that would resolve these conflicts if council would like. We can talk about those during Q&A if you'd like. In terms of what the OSBT recommended approach might look like on the ground, this map represents an initial estimate of which open space trails might be included with the implementation of the recommended approach by the Open Space Board of Trustees. It would allow e-bikes on about 3% of OSMP trails. The OSBT also considered a motion that failed 2 to 3, which provided operational guidance to the department in support of the staff preferred alternative of B, but also included the addition of Chapman Drive, Wonderland Lake, and South Foothills trails west of Broadway. This alternative has been coined Alternative B+, and it would allow e-bikes on about 25% of OSMP's trail network. While Alternative B+ would provide more access than the staff preferred alternative, it requires additional messaging to support OSMP operations and our visitors and community members in knowing and complying with regulations. We also want to acknowledge that there could be increased challenges with enforcement with this approach. But in terms of trail characteristics, the additional trails identified in Alternative B+ are similar in nature to the Plains trails included in Alternative B. So to wrap up, in support of the staff recommended approach OSMP requests council make a motion to adopt Ordinance 8575 to allow e-bikes on open space as outlined in this slide and also in your memo. And again, in terms of operations, the staff preferred alternative is to initially implement the policy to allow e-bikes on Plains Trails and the Boulder Canyon Trail outlined in Alternative B. Of course, we welcome council input on where the department would plan to implement the policy and where we'd manage trails for e-biking. So that concludes part one. That's the staff presentation. And before clarifying questions, we do have the two members of the Open Space Board of Trustees here. I'll turn it over to Board Chair Dave Coons, and then you'll hear from Vice Chair Member Michelle Estrella.
Fantastic. Well, Dave, thanks for being here. If you can come address us, please.
Thank you, Marnie. Good evening, Mayor Brockett and members of the council and staff. We appreciate the opportunity to speak to you on this item this evening. I'm going to actually ask Michelle to lead off the discussion with. She's what? Go for it. No. So Michelle will lead off the discussion, and then I'll follow.
Did y'all want to arm wrestle over who goes first?
What's that?
Do you want to arm wrestle over who goes first?
I'll win.
Okay.
That's okay. Hi, my name is Michelle Estrella. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Thank you all for being here tonight. As is mentioned, I am the Vice Chair of the Open Space Board of Trustees, and I am here to speak on the minority dissenting position of the OSBT. As was mentioned, we were in the minority in February 2023. Not sure that would be the case today. Nonetheless, I would like to speak to our position. I am privileged enough to be a resident of Boulder for going on 18 years. And I do want to qualify that I own a cargo e-bike, and I was an early adopter and can still be seen in town with my elementary twins on the back of my bike going across the paths. So full disclosure there. And by the way, it is a Class 2 bicycle with a throttle, which to get started is really important, by the way. So first of all, I want to thank staff and the community for weighing in on this very complex topic. Staff has been working on this for years, saints here. And you know, we had a 3-2 vote. It was a split vote. You know, but I just want to reiterate the fact that the minority position really supported the staff recommendation, but felt that it didn't go quite far enough in meeting a City of Boulder's goals. I do have a presentation. I don't know where that is. I don't know if I was supposed to pop it up. It's okay, but there is a map that, and I'm terrible at maps, Dave knows this, that has, staff recommendation. Yeah, thank you. On the second slide, has the staff recommendation in blue, but there's a plus sign on the ones that we're calling B+ at this point, which has just a couple of additions. So, you know, why B+? You know, clearly, sorry, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. Equity. Demographics in this community are changing, and we need to acknowledge that. You will hear people debate you know, the definitions of an aging community and an aged community and how people have different viewpoints on that. This is Boulder. We're always going to disagree on certain things, and that's healthy. But, you know, we thought that B+ harmonizes, and a large part of this is because of B, the standard alternative B, harmonizes the surrounding land managers and reduces confusion, because I think people want to do the right thing here, but are not clear on what that right thing is. There was overwhelming support, and you'll hear debate again about that, for alternative B, but we think, alternative A, which allowed for e-bikes on all of the trails that allow bikes in general. But we thought that B+ was a healthy compromise and a good starting point. It also allows for understanding the rules, so that would help with compliance. It allows the ability to the community to enjoy open space safely and to travel to and from our trailheads and enjoy our trails safely. And move across town. So the addition that we have proposed, I'm trying to keep this down, is Chapman Drive. It's a wide road, and it is a natural extension to the Boulder Canyon Trail. It provides a safe loop. The South Foothills and Wonderland Lakes trails provide the only safe north-south biking route in North Boulder. I will admit that I have accidentally taken that on my cargo bike with my kids trying to go to soccer. This is well before I was on Open Space Board of Trustees. So, okay. It was an accident. I was lost. That happens all the time. But the last thing I want to add before my time is up is that we thought that this doesn't go far enough. We would and it wasn't part of the official motion, but we did have it in our minutes that we would like to see a pilot of single track trails west of Broadway. And that was similar to what Jefferson County had done. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michelle. And that ticket will be in the mail shortly.
Okay. All right.
Great. Dave, you're up.
Thanks again. I do appreciate the opportunity to speak to you tonight. However, it grieves me deeply to come before you tonight to talk about the Open Space Board of Trustees' recommendation on allowing e-bikes as a permitted use of open space trails. And that is because a seemingly routine question of what constitutes an appropriate use of open space trails, in fact, camouflages some fundamental issues and concerns. First and foremost is the apparent disregard underlying the recommendation to allow e-bike use on open space trails of more than 50 years of precedent as to the intent and definition of the term passive recreation, used in Section 176 of the City Charter, voted on and approved by the electorate of Boulder in 1986, codifying the mission and purposes of the city's open space program, established by a vote of the citizens in 1967. Every Open Space Board of Trustees and every City Council since the inception of the Open Space Program in 1967 has supported and adhered to the use of the term passive recreation in the City Charter, meaning human-powered, non-vehicular, non-motorized, and non-mechanically assisted activity, with two exceptions, one being horses and the other bicycles, and then only where that use is specifically designated. Open space founders and framers knew exactly what they were doing by not permitting or allowing motorized vehicle use of open space under the rubric of passive recreation. They understood that motors in natural areas would completely change the environment, the experience and the perception, the being in a special place. Recommendations contained in the three motions of majority of the Open Space Board of Trustees to Council proposed a phased approach to assessing the impacts on the open space system where connections with multi-agency managed trails and city paved trails, that is, for example, greenways, to promote management consistency are monitored and evaluated before any decisions are made to expand the use of e-bikes on trails east of Broadway and Highway 93 as exceptions to the open space non-motorized recreational uses listed in the city charter. Finally, the essence of the board's majority recommendation to council is its discomfort with the city attorney's office opinion that the charter language can be changed or modified by a, quote, legislative finding or by legislative fiat by council. We respectfully disagree with this interpretation of the process to change or modify the city charter, and in our motion to council recommend a process that is in keeping with the intent of the program's founders and years of precedent and community support. We understand that a role of council is to interpret the city charter, but when that interpretation fundamentally changes the intent and purpose of the charter language, that final authority must be the community's citizens. We believe that fundamental changes to the charter, for example, approving motors on open space, require a vote of the people. Circumventing that requirement and the process to achieve it may result in future unintended and potentially grievous consequences. Thank you for consideration of the recommendations of the Open Space Board of Trustees.
Thank you, Dave. All right, so does council have questions for staff or for either of our OSBT representatives? I got Jeannie.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just have a few questions, and my first question is actually for the members of the board. And my first question has to do, does B plus incorporate B at a lower level? And did B plus had any type of community engagement? And then my third question is, I hear, and maybe I misheard, that staff mentioned that with B plus, there would be some issues with compliance and needing of additional messaging. But I just heard earlier that B plus will actually lead to more compliance. So I'm just a little bit confused about which is which. So any type of clarification would be helpful. Thank you.
Michelle, I think that's for you since you were talking about B plus.
Yes, when we considered all the different options, we did hear, now staff laid out 3 options, A, B, and C. We heard additional input from the community asking for additional access on trails in which that they access the north of town and in completing that loop on Chapman Drive. I think you can find those in the compendium, how do you say that word, of comments. Okay. And it is an addition to B plus.
Okay.
It's in addition to B.
In addition to B.
I'm sorry, B. It's in addition to the staff recommendation B, which is what we're calling B plus.
Thank you. So can I ask one more clarifying question before I go to the compliance part? Because my understanding, what I heard earlier and also what is in the memo, B plus is 22%.
That's B.
B is 22% and B plus is 20.
About 25, and
25.
These are rough estimates,
okay.
Given the time.
Thank you for that. And how do you, you mentioned the compliance part, that B plus somehow actually helps with compliance. How?
Well, I think that B plus, alternative B is clear in comparing it to the OSBT recommendation because it includes Plains Trails and Boulder Canyon. I think that Wonderland Lake serves an important transportation need of the community, and I think that the compliance can be solved by appropriate signage.
Can I? So here's what I hear. It was ABC, but B plus came out from what you got from the community, feedback from the community. It leads you to B plus.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Correct.
Other questions? Lauren?
I was wondering if, in the staff presentation, there was a comment on how B plus might be more difficult to enforce, and so I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit, or what you...
Yeah, I think, am I on? Yeah, okay. Come closer, it's really hard to get this. So the alternatives that the department came up with through our core team of subject matter experts at the department, first, taking a look at all trails that allow bikes, that's A. In determining if there was a subset, having a geographic boundary really can help with our messaging as well as help with our community member to understand. The Broadway corridor, from north to south, has historically been a corridor that's been identified through other open space biking, for example, and it really can help our messaging. And this came both from our outreach and education team members as well as our rangers. We landed on a geographic boundary would be a lot easier to comply with and for people to understand and know. Anything to add?
Keep going.
And I have a follow-up question on that. So, like Michelle, I have occasionally ended up on trails where I was not supposed to be, partially because Google will map you through them, And so I was wondering if you guys have done any outreach to try and have, you know, like how we can have tollway notifications, if we could have like, this is not a e-bike friendly route or something like that when with Google mapping.
We can certainly coordinate that and look into that with our RIS staff, do our mapping and integrate with our mapping systems. I know that they do kind of collaborate on some of that. So we can mention that to them and see if we can enhance that and make it more clear for visitors.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then along I had another question around sort of motorized things. I understand that the regulation we're looking at is specifically around recreation, but I know that in some areas that they go so far as to not allow like motorized maintenance equipment. Do we allow motorized maintenance equipment in our open space?
Sure. So, well, we have motor vehicles, right? And they can be used in operations, for operations of open space. And how they are allowed is that the motor vehicles were allowed when open space lands were managed by the Mountain Parks Department. And so this use has been grandfathered in, and it existed prior to the city establishing the provisions of the open space charter. And BRC 836 does have the vehicle regulation, which allows motor vehicles just for operation, for operational needs, or for trailhead parking. And so there's just not a regulation in the BRC or charter that specifically, states that motor vehicles are not allowed, right? Like it's silent, doesn't say that they're not prohibited, and then by ordinance we regulate them.
And like when we're doing wildfire mitigation, do we use chainsaws, or do we, try and go the old-fashioned way and handsaw things?
Well, I'm not on the FEMP crew, but I'm pretty sure they use chainsaws.
Okay, thank you.
That's some Paul Bunyan action out there. Tara, and then I'll call on myself.
I'm curious. I'm not sure. I read the packet a few times, but I could have missed it. Tell me more detail about what happened in Jefferson County. A lot of people are talking about Jefferson County. Can you be more detailed as to their findings, especially how it's the most relatable to our parts of open space?
Yeah, and so Jefferson County is one of, so Boulder County Parks and Open Space and Jefferson County both allow e-bikes. Jefferson County is a little bit different, and I think that that's a direct response from the community member feedback that they received. They allow Class 1 e-bikes on, oh crap, I don't have it in front of me, but I believe that they allow Class 1 on their soft surface trails, Class 2 on their hard surface trails. And that is the feedback that they got from their community. One of the things that Jefferson County did also is they did a pilot, and they allowed people to try e-bikes. They interviewed people before and after. When somebody hadn't ridden an e-bike, they were a little bit more apprehensive. And after riding an e-bike, they felt more comfortable with that vehicle and that activity coexisting with them.
And then they were addicted to it, like me, I'm sure.
I can add a little bit to that, that since they've added e-bikes to their system, they've reported no increase in concerns or conflicts. And then in Boulder County Parks and Open Space, which is also very similar, I just wanted to say too, they've found that since they've implemented that the speed doesn't really differ by bike types. And so I just thought those were two relevant things to add to that.
And one more question, speaking of speed, for Class 3 and 4, which can go, I guess, 27 or 28 miles an hour, how would we be able to not have Class 3 and 4?
I don't think there's a Class 4. I think
there is. I looked on the internet, but it could be not true because the internet.
Well, Colorado, when they did their state law change, identified 3 classifications, with Class 3 being the one that can go faster. And in terms of allowing them, it would be, education, outreach, enforcement, and working with our partners, and our partners would include those that sell e-bikes as well, to help our community members know and understand. One good tool that we've used throughout this engagement process is we've worked with our website team, and when they pull up the trail map, there's a box that comes up that says the city is considering allowing e-bikes. For more information, go here. That kind of messaging is a pretty good point of sale to let people know where they can and can't, and what types of vehicles and e-bikes they could use.
Okay, a couple quick questions from me, and then I'll go to Matt after that. So in other words, so just to repeat, the other jurisdictions didn't see an increase in complaints or conflicts after allowing e-bikes. How about an increase in accidents or the severity of accidents? Because I've heard concerns from community members about that.
Actually, they haven't they don't really have much in the way of accidents occurring. They're not seeing increases. They're not increasing in citations. They haven't increased in any medical incidents or complaints. In fact, those that use e-bikes have, what we've heard from our rangers from other agencies is people are thanking them.
Okay, good. And we've gotten a lot of community emails that have been upset that we would allow bikes for the first time on the South Boulder Creek Trail and the White Rocks Trail, but I think they're misinformed. Those currently allow non-e-bikes, don't they?
That's correct. They do allow the South Boulder Creek Trail and White Rocks Trail are both multi-use that allow bikes. Analog bikes today.
Right. So, because we're not proposing to add e-bikes anywhere where bikes aren't currently permitted.
That is correct.
Okay. One little detail on the Wonderland Lake area. So there's a loop around Wonderland Lake, and I want to say maybe 3/4 of it is open space managed, and then there's the southern quarter, which I believe is on Parks land, and there's a paved multi-use path in that section. So, as a Parks paved multi-use path, would that currently allow e-bikes in that section?
I would have to double check. But if that's part of the greenway system that already allows it on that segment, or if we would need to coordinate that with Parks and Rec to finish that loop, so it's not doesn't have conflicting regulations, right, on that part of the trail.
Okay, yeah, maybe we can look into that a little bit. But I think all those Parks multi-use paths do allow e-bikes currently. But
can you look that up?
Maybe we can.
If it's on Parks and Open, or if it's on Parks and Open, I'm sorry,
Parks and
on open space and mountain park land, then no. But if it's on Parks and Rec land, then yes.
I should be precise. It's Parks and Rec land, I
Thank
believe,
you.
right? So it would be okay. Very good. And then let's see. I think that about covers it. So thank you for all of you. And by the way, the presentation was information packed and also pithy, so I appreciated that. Thanks. All right, we'll go to Matt.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I was just going to echo how solid that presentation was, and I appreciate the sort of long runway that staff has done to sort of get that information that's nice and digestible and quite complete. My question kind of piggybacks a little bit on what Aaron was just asking, and sort of as staff was mentioning that we haven't seen those impacts in our sister cities. I know there's some concerns here, but evidence would maybe dictate that those concerns may not actually come to be. But is there a plan and or commitment by staff to monitor some of these trails? And therefore, if we were to see accidents or other negative impacts, would there be a willingness to adjust accordingly if those were to occur? Not saying there were, given that other communities aren't seeing them, but I just want to make sure there's a willingness for us to look and adapt if we need to.
Absolutely. If e-bikes are allowed, we have a holistic approach to manage for e-bikes. We currently, as a department, we do a lot of monitoring, and that's my ring, but my phone's off, so. First, e-biking would be added as a new activity category for our visitor surveys that we do on a regular basis, and we ask the activities that primary activities, and so we would include e-biking on that. And that would allow us to quantify and detect any changes in activity, as well as if we identify any issues. And those issues could come up through some of the feedback we get through those visitor surveys. We all know that community members also can reach us individually, as well as we can learn from our rangers if there's any issues. So monitoring, yes. Education and outreach, targeted enforcement are all parts of how we would manage for e-bikes.
Thank you for that answer.
Did I answer
Appreciate it.
everything?
You nailed my question. Thank you.
Great. And so just a quick follow-up on it. So visitor surveys, that could if somebody, for example, experienced a negative interaction but that didn't include a collision, they could report something like that as part of it.
And they do, and we actually do track. We track interactions between users, and I think it's around 95% of our interactions between bikers on our system today are positive with other users on the open space system.
Great. Well, thanks for all those excellent answers. So seeing no other hands raised, let's go ahead to our public hearing. We have 25 people signed up to speak. Each person will have 2 minutes of allotted time, unless you're pooling time, in which case you get 4 minutes. And just remind everyone about our rules of public participation, just to please abide by those as you're speaking. So we've got about 50-50 in-person and virtual. We'll start with our in-person folks. Our first person to speak is Karen Holweg, who is pooling with Gretchen Hine and Cindy Carlisle. Can we just hear from Gretchen and Cindy that they're present for the pooling? There's Gretchen. I don't see our former colleague Cindy.
Cindy's online.
Cindy's online, but I'm not seeing her name listed online. Cindy, if you are one of the folks who is online, could you use the raised hand function just so that we know that's you?
And
there we
she
go.
just
And
raised
I
her
will
hand.
use your name to reflect that. Thank you.
You are all clear, Karen, for 4 minutes.
Thanks. Before I start, could you pull up my slides, please?
By the way, our next speakers will be Sally Greenwood and Kristen Marshall.
Thank you. I'm Karen Holweg, and I'm a city resident and former Open Space Board member. City Council approved the Transportation Department's pilot allowing e-assisted bicycles on certain hard-surfaced multi-use paths, as shown in this slide, in 2013. I want to review with you the decisions by the Open Space Board of Trustees since that time. And on my next slide, and on the other slides, you'll see quotes directly from the archived minutes of the Open Space Board. In 2013, OSBT passed on a 4-to-1 vote a motion stating that the use of e-bikes on open space paved paths is not appropriate under the charter, and recommended that staff begin investigating a possible disposal of paved multi-use paths on OSMP land that principally serve a transportation function. Next slide. A year later, the trustees approved on a 3-to-2 vote the disposal of 12 small, non-contiguous paved parcels of open space trails, which primarily serve a non-open space purpose, giving their maintenance to Public Works Transportation. An example is the cement path along the Broadway in front of NIST where bikes go. About 2 years later, staff suggested to OSBT the disposal of an additional 20 OSMP paved trails, but after extended discussion, the trustees rejected this proposal because these trails primarily serve open space charter purposes. They're trails like Bobolink. Obviously, by 2016, there was a clear distinction made, with the board clearly concluding that 1, e-bikes on OSMP paths is not appropriate under the charter, and 2, if OSMP trails primarily serve open space charter purposes, they should be held and continue to be managed by OSMP. That those trails are distinctively different from the Department of Transportation trails that serve a transportation function. Next slide. In 2018, down in Denver, the legislature passed a new state law, as staff has noted, saying that local authorities can produce regulations for e-bikes, and it was reiterated that in Boulder, e-bikes are prohibited on OSMP. In August 2018, there was a written information item in the OSBT packet about regional coordination on e-bikes, and it stated that e-bikes will continue to be prohibited on OSMP lands including the OSMP sections of the county's Lobo Trail. Next slide. So here we are in 2023, and the Open Space Board of Trustees has recommended that in keeping with the charter, trails close to Boulder like these be retained as multi-use trails safe for enjoyable pedestrian use, and that to address the issue of connecting multi-jurisdictional regional trails like the Lobo Trail and National Wildlife Refuge Trail, an exception allow e-bikes on the OSMP segments of the trail so that we can make regional trails contiguous. I hope that you'll seriously consider and approve this recommendation tonight to enable the 85% of OSMP users who prefer hiking and walking to continue to enjoy open space trails like these. I'm sure it's clear to you that when it comes to e-bikes on the city's open space policies under the charter, those policies for years have been very different from both the City Transportation and Mobility Department and the Boulder County open space policies. In many areas, like dog regulations, there are differences. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Now we have Sally Greenwood, Kristen Marshall, and Catherine Smith.
I'm here to support the Open Space Board recommendation affirming Council's 2005 decision to prevent motorized vehicles on open space. It is beyond ingenuous to consider electric bicycles as passive recreation. I urge you not to diminish Boulder commitment to a most treasured asset of open space, the opportunity to be on trails without motor vehicles. I've hiked and biked open space since 1991. Open space has been such a benefit to me as a Boulder resident and a point of pride to brag about. I hike frequently and like poking along to bird, enjoy the scenery, and photograph flowers. I'm not reassured that I can enjoy trails shared with vehicles traveling at 15 miles per hour. My top speed is maybe 2. Further, I'm hard of hearing and oblivious to bikers who approach me from the rear and assume I hear them. So far, I've avoided accidents, but only because hearing friends have hauled me out of harm's way. I trust the Open Space Board's recommendations and find the professional staff's opinions alarming. For example, sections of the White Rocks Trail are far too narrow to support pedestrians and bikes passing comfortably. Do not assume on my behalf that at age 80, I lust for speed on an electric bicycle in order to enjoy nature. On the contrary, I and many peers relish being pedestrians.
Thank you, Sally. Now we have Kristen Marshall, Catherine Smith, and Richard Harris.
Thank you, Council. Suggestions to allow e-bikes on additional nature trails in the Boulder open space reminded me of a hot, sticky, and sleepless summer in Albany, New York, decades ago. I was an undergraduate, and I'd opted to take the cheapest apartment I could find. Unfortunately, it was right across a motorcycle bar. So you get where sleepless comes in. And I understand that motorcycles are different than e-bikes. I also understand that the wildlife in Boulder County is different than the wildlife on my old neighborhood in Albany, New York. I think I saw pigeons. Let's see, rats, cockroaches, and students Those are the primary species. They were not endangered. But there are species in open space which are endangered and which are sensitive and would be impacted by motorized bicycles, e-bikes. E-bikes are not ecological bikes, they're e-bikes, right? So it's a distinctive difference. So I asked the city council to recognize that nature has rights. I've heard several times that we manage the city parks. Let me correct that. We are part of the city parks. We are part of nature. Let's respect that. And please do not extend motorbikes into natural parks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's see, now we have Catherine Smith, Richard Harris, and Catherine Harris.
Good evening. My name is Catherine Smith. I'm a former resident of Boulder City and a resident of the county now. I'm very appreciative of the space that we have throughout the county and particularly Boulder City's commitment to our natural environment and to all the things that live here. I wanted to talk a little bit tonight about the difference between going to and going through. And to me, people who are going through a space have another destination in mind. And those are people who are seeing the open space as a way to transport themselves from place A to place B. That is very different from a recreational user who is going to that space to feel the air, to hear the bird song, to smell the air, to see what is living there, to admire the wildflowers. Those are completely different uses, and I think as we've seen in the presentation, they're recognized as different uses and regulated quite differently. I think that is part of why the Open Space Board of Trustees is giving you a different recommendation, is because they are looking at the people who are going to the space. I also share the concern that the city charter does not allow for an interpretation that passive recreation allows motorized transportation, and agree with the concern that once you open that Pandora's box, how are you going to distinguish the unicycle, which I did see a motorized unicycle, the scooter, the class 3s, from other modes of transit?
Thank you, Catherine. Now, Richard Harris, then Catherine Harris and Dave Sutherland.
Thank you. I'm speaking for Plan Boulder County and taking off my mask. Thank you for doing this in person.
And Dick, if you can get right in that microphone, please.
Certainly. Whoops. Oh, it's falling off.
If you break it, we'll send you the bill.
So I'm speaking for Plan Boulder County to start over, and I wasted about
No, you
30
can.
seconds.
Can we start back to 2 minutes, please?
Okay. So Plan Boulder County supports the Open Space Trustees' recommendation regarding e-biking on open space trails. The trustees reiterate the decisions of previous boards happening since 2013, asserting that e-bikes on open space paths are not appropriate under the charter. And secondly, they amend the section of the Boulder Revised Code on motorized vehicles by making an exception to allow e-bikes where a regional trail requires access to a segment of OSMP trail to enable connectivity, while still meeting OSMP's protections and visitor management goals. The trustees find the city charter states that one of the allowed purposes of open space is preservation of land for passive recreational use. The 2005 council-approved visitor master plan states that passive recreation is defined as non-motorized activities and that motorized vehicles are not considered passive recreation. The 2019 master plan finds hiking as the most popular activity on the city's trails, with 85% of adult respondents saying so. And I point out that the staff's recent online questionnaire and intercept surveys did not reach this variety of open space visitors and thus underestimated the views of hikers. Open space staff reported in 22 that overwhelming majorities are concerned about the speed, conflict, overcrowding, and increased visitation that e-bikes will cause. We request the council adopt the trustees' views. E-bikes are not a passive recreational use under the charter, the open space master plan, and other documents. They are therefore not an appropriate use. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Catherine Harris, Dave Sutherland, and Patricia Billig.
I'm Catherine Harris, 2645 Briarwood Drive. I just bought an e-bike to tool around Boulder. I also walk on open space trails about 4 days a week. I would never think of riding my e-bike on these trails. Our city charter, section 176, states that our open space is for passive recreation. Passive recreation is defined as non-motorized activities. For heaven's sakes, e-bikes have a battery motor on them. What could be clearer? I walk on open space trails for the beauty, the quiet, for respite, for reflection. It seems like many people in our culture today are anxious and perhaps quick to anger. Where can we find calm and our better selves? How can a person find respite and relaxation when there's a fear that an e-bike may come up at any moment behind us? What about walking with a child or a dog? Which way do we jump? Some people are advocating a long list of basic changes to the heart of our open space charter in order to open the door to e-bikes on our trails. Contrast this with the simple and sensible recommendation of our Open Space Board of Trustees. Our Open Space Board recommends one exception to the charter to allow e-bikes to connect with a regional trail. The board recommendations, I urge you to follow the recommendations of our Open Space Board. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Catherine. Now we have Dave Sutherland, then Patricia Billig, and Wendy Sweet.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dave Sutherland. I'm a Boulder resident. For nearly 25 years, I worked for the Open Space and Mountain Parks Department in Education and Outreach. And in that time, I took literally hundreds of groups of people out onto the open space system for educational programs of all ages, from preschoolers to seniors. In that time, I've come to know the open space and mountain park system intimately, and I've come to know the visitors very, very well over all of that time. And it's in that context that I want to urge you not to approve e-bikes for open space and mountain parks trails. A lot of people have already talked about the city charter, and I just want to say chipping away at the charter is a slippery slope, and I urge you not to start down that slope. Once you make exceptions for one piece of motorized recreational equipment, you might find that you're making more exceptions, and where does it stop? But really what I wanted to talk about tonight was about equity, and that I think e-bikes are actually, despite all the hype, not dedicated to equity. The reason I say that is a lot of people use open space. Kids doing nature study, people on horses, people with dogs on leash, people with dogs off leash, groups of people, seniors, people who maybe have disabilities. And let's be really honest here. Electronic bikes can go 20 miles an hour or more. How are you going to keep the Class 3 e-bikes off of open space? I can tell you, as somebody who worked in education and outreach for 25 years, education and outreach isn't going to do it. And I would ask you to think about how effective was the Vision Zero 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. I'm sure there's a lot of education and outreach. Where's the enforcement? Ain't going to work. You're going to have, you know, people going all kinds of speeds out there. And in addition, it's pretty easy to jimmy the speed limiter on an e-bike. If you do a simple web search, you get a whole bunch of sites come up with do-it-yourself instructions to disable the speed limits on an e-bike. So equity is about driving other people off the land because you have 20-mile-an-hour machines out there. I just want to say that something that goes 20 miles an hour on a trail with kids, dogs, and seniors who can't hear is not passive recreation.
Thanks, Dave. We have Patricia Billig, Wendy Sweet, and Steve Pomerantz.
For the last 35 years, I've made my living as a scientist, developing sampling plans and surveys and things like that, analyzing the data, and then using that data to make decisions. That's basically what I've done for years. And I want to make, and I'm also a former open space trustee, I want to make 2 points tonight to urge you to go to support the open space trustee recommendations. First of all, the first point is, oh, you didn't start the timer.
No. Good catch, Pat.
Okay. All right. Now I'm starting. Know your data before you use it to make a decision. I do this on a daily basis, talking with agencies, with corporations, understand where that data came from before you use it to make a decision. The unfortunate news is that a lot of the graphs and things that you were looking at from the online survey do not represent what the Boulder general population thinks about this. And I think you've gotten some inklings about that. And I can't go into why and everything right now, all the details, but it doesn't represent the general population in Boulder. There is no way that it does because of a number of reasons. The good news is you do have a contracted, statistically significant survey that was done along with the master plan in 2019, only 4 years ago, less than 4 years ago, that demonstrated that 85% of the people in Boulder prefer hiking and walking on open space. And you should use that. So don't vote for e-bikes on open space thinking that you're doing something that the general population wants, because you're not. Second thing on White Rocks, I was just there. I go there like every month since it opened. And just recently I was there, and this point was just made, but I'll just say, because I experienced it again last week. Middle of the week, middle of the day, not a holiday, not a weekend. What was on that trail? Toddlers, horses, bikes, seniors, high school kids, and we were all there. And you're going to add something like the points have already been made to that. It's crazy and it's irresponsible, in my opinion.
Thanks, Patricia.
Thank you.
All right, our last two in-person speakers are Wendy Sweet and Steve Pomerantz.
Hi, my name is Wendy Sweet, and I'm the Executive Director of the Boulder Mountain Bike Alliance and a 30-year resident of Boulder. I'd like to thank OSMP staff for all their hard work in this e-bike evaluation. BMA believes that e-bikes are compatible with passive recreation, and we are very much in favor of opening trail connections that will allow for more people to safely get around Boulder out of their cars. Throughout this e-bike evaluation process, we have asked that OSMP conduct a pilot program to study e-bikes on single-track trails. We have not asked for this, not because staff did not do their due diligence in finding e-bike studies by other government agencies. Rather, we asked for a pilot program because this is Boulder, and in Boulder, people want to see for themselves. There have been several public comments before me suggesting that e-bike usage on city open space will displace other visitors, will lead to more visitor conflicts, will have harmful impacts on wildlife, will negatively impact trails, and other speculations. But the vast majority of e-bike pilot programs and studies to date do not show these concerns to be valid, including the e-bike pilot programs by Jeffco and Boulder County. While staff will not be going forward with a pilot program, BMA strongly suggests that the city move forward with this process using adaptive management practices with measurable data. What will success look like? What will failure look like? What metrics will you use to determine this? If there are issues that need to be mitigated, what will those mitigation processes look like? Emotional feelings by a few people against people riding bicycles should not be a factor in allowing this use on our open space lands. Not wanting to share open space with different types of visitors or having one's experience change from a past level is not a data metric. The mountain bike community is all too familiar with public processes based on guesswork, fear, and speculation, including the West TSA process that continues to unfairly prohibit bikes on over 100 miles of trails west of Boulder. Let's make this decision based on facts and data. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Last in-person speaker is Steve Pomerantz.
Steve Pomerantz, 335 17th Street. I'm 81. I still ride mountain bikes. I've been riding mountain bikes since mountain bikes first existed. And I support the Open Space Board of Trustees recommendation. However, I would further limit it to say no single tracks, no electric bikes on single tracks. And so I'm going to hit a few points here. First, the legal issues around this. The approach that's recommended by staff won't stand up, and I suspect you guys will end up in court. The areas that are necessary for transportation, most of them aren't. I ride a regular bike too, and you can get around fine. You don't need to use any of those trails. Nobody seems to be talking about the effects on wildlife and animals and plants. If you've ever ridden on a single track on the weekends here in Boulder, you know that bikes are going off the trail all the time because there's too many of them already. And these are human-powered bikes. Can you imagine what would happen when you put a bunch of e-bikes out there in addition? Tripling the population of bikes. They already drive most of the hikers off on the south end of town. And so it's going to just get worse. You got to realize e-bikes make it a lot easier to go out there and do it. So there's going to be a lot more people. And it's already bad. Nobody wants to go out there and ride on the weekends except people that can't do anything else. With regard to this notion, somebody proposed a pilot on single track trails west of Broadway. You want to revolt? You're going to have one. I mean, people are going to start putting sticks through people's spokes over something like that. And compliance, there's no enforcement now. So, you know, it's going to get better. Who's going to pay for that? And how are you going to do it? Radar guns? Is open space folks going to be out there with radar guns and ticket books? It's not a good idea. Don't do it. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Steve. Although just maybe a reminder to folks to not talk about potential violence being done by one person to another.
It's already happened.
So. All right, that ends our in-person speakers, and we will now go to our virtual speakers, of whom our first three are Frances Hartog, Ruth Wright, and Lynn Siegel. We have somebody who think, maybe if you can come over and talk to the clerk, maybe, and see.
I tried to earlier, but I couldn't.
And Frances, you should be able to be heard now.
Great. Hi, I'm Frances Hartog, Galena Way in Boulder. I've lived in our city for over 40 years, raised 2 kids here, served as an open space trustee, and worked as a natural resources environmental lawyer. I do urge council to adopt the Open Space Board of Trustees recommendations. Their approach provides access to key regional trails, which is an actual plus for abating climate change, while maintaining the important precedent that e-bikes are not a passive recreational use of open space under the Charter, Open Space Master Plan, and other documents. As an open space trustee, I experienced I have to say it, full court press, because some of our minds may be on basketball tonight, of the Mountain Bike Alliance to access our open space for their sport. Like the majority of people who visit open space by foot and enjoy seeing wildlife, I expressed concern then about the effect of high-speed bikes on wildlife and humans alike. Wildlife already was suffering from an onslaught of dogs that were under neither voice nor sight control. Now, council would introduce this new use to our overburdened open space lands. E-bikes are twice as heavy as regular bikes. Newton's second law tells us that force equals mass times velocity. So do the math. Combine that with possibly less experienced riders or riders new to our trails, we are a tourist destination. Not only will this present an unnecessary danger to others, but will displace pedestrian users. It's a slippery slope. What's to stop a future council from making another legislative finding to impose their favorite sport on our precious open space? The city's collected taxes for over 50 years based on the understanding this money will be used to carry out the purposes of open space in the charter. It's a violation of the public trust to use those lands for other purposes. Thanks for your service to our community.
Thank you, Frances. Our next speaker is Ruth Wright, but I'm getting reports that she's not in the meeting. Ruth, if you're out there, if you can raise your hand and let the moderators know. But since we're not seeing you right now, we will come back to you if you come into the meeting later. And so we will move on then to Lynn Siegel, then Larry McDonald, and Dana Bove. Dana.
Well, I thought that Boulder was an athletic community. I don't get it. I don't get it. Health means plugging along on your bike with human energy. No, I ride my bike all over the place. I don't take it up in the mountains. In the mountains, I walk. I hike. I don't get it. This is an athletic community, and they're capitulating to electric bikes. What gives? You know, the open space is in deficit 300 million, who knows what, and you're going to legislate who's going out on these e-bikes. You know, there's one thing I can say. Elders, developmentally disabled in some way, should be able to go on electric bikes. I do think that. But clearly, they are not passive. Is the sky blue? You know, where do you want to go? Where are you going? Wherever you are, there you'll be. And people can walk, and they can hike, and they can get better health and better, you know, more exercise doing that. I mean, I can't say anything else. I agree, of course, with Steve Pomerantz. Everything he says is like gold. But this is so clear, so obvious. Do the right thing. Do not even think about allowing electric bikes, except for the disabled.
Thank you, Lynn. Now we have Larry McDonald, Dana Bove, and James Morris.
My name's Larry McDonald. I live in Boulder, have for a long time. Thank you. By this time, of course, you've heard everything that I wanted to say has been said. So, you know, I'm just going to try to do my thing. But what I want to say is you have a threshold question that I don't think you're really acknowledging, which is, do you have the authority to do what you are proposing to do? I mean, you've heard from many of us that, in our view, we just don't believe that the idea of motorized biking on open space is passive recreation. And despite what the staff has told you in its packet, the charter does define passive recreation. It does it on the basis of examples. It says hiking, photography, or nature studies. Those are pretty obviously passive kind of activities. It then adds the possibility of a more active recreational activity such as biking, by special designation. And I think that reflected the feeling of those who drafted the charter, that they were uncertain about whether those kind of activities really were suitable for open space. Now, we have, of course, allowed those, we kind of tried to work with them. I think the drafters of the charter are terrific. I'm hoping Ruth will be able to join us tonight. Set out a very clear vision of the management of open space lands for their preservation and enjoyment. I just don't see any way that vision included recreational uses of motorized vehicles of any kind as a form of recreation. I speak from some experience. I served on the OSPT board more than 20 years ago. I took my responsibilities as a trustee quite seriously. I thought the use of the term trustee really meant something. Am I done?
Yes, Larry, your time's up.
Oh, that was hard to believe. That was 2 minutes. Okay,
2 minutes
sorry.
goes fast. Thanks for your testimony. And I see that Ruth Wright has joined the meeting, so if we could bring Ruth forward, please.
Ready. You can. Okay,
We should there we go.
Okay, Ruth is coming shortly here. Okay, go ahead. Okay, you can start talking.
Thanks for talking. My name is Ruth Wright. It is important to note that over the last years, the city has developed a system of about 300 miles of bikeways for bikes and e-bikes. Since 1967, when Boulder passed the first sales tax to purchase of open space lands, the city has been acquiring lands to build our open space and mountain park system. In addition, as we envisioned, we now have almost 47,000 acres of land and 150 miles of trails. In addition, it is important to note that over the last 40 years, the city has developed a system of about 300 miles of bikeways for bikes and e-bikes. In 1986, 77% of the voters passed a charter amendment to provide permanent protection for open space. Section 176 says, quote, "Open space land shall be acquired, maintained, preserved, retained, and used only for the 8 purposes listed, which include preservation of land for passive recreation." I have been asked what we mean or meant by passive recreation when we helped write that charter amendment. Well, it simply means that on open space, people have the opportunities to hike, watch wildlife in the habitat that we have preserved, take photos and videos, do everything that does not scare away the wildlife nor damage the ecological heritage. Regarding the issue of e-bikes on open space, in my opinion, using a motorized vehicle that can go 20 miles an hour cannot be categorized as passive recreation, and that any trail that is open for use of e-bikes will no longer be used by walkers and hikers, especially those with children. Instead of looking for and observing wildlife, they would be on the watch for speeding e-bikes. I strongly urge to accept the recommendations of the Open Space Board of Trustees. They acknowledge that we all need to abide by the wise words placed in the charter years ago,
Ruth,
but can still provide exceptions to allow e-bikes on regional trails. I also hope
Ruth,
that we will
I'm so sorry to cut you off.
our treasured open space and with the reverence and respect it deserves.
Yeah. Just trying to make sure that the rules are the same for everybody. But thank you so much for your testimony, Ruth, and for everything you've done for our community over the years. Okay, coming back to our list, it's Dana Bovey, James Morris, and Laura Thompson.
Hi, my name is Dana Bovey, and I've lived in Boulder since 1974, and I've always cherished our open space lands, and so thrilled to follow up after Ruth, actually. Our nonprofit group studies raptors on lands that include Boulder open space. We often study eagles along the White Rocks Nature Trail. To consolidate time, I'll state that myself and our 501c volunteers and members strongly support are strongly opposed to staff and OSMP's alternative B recommendations. E-bikes should not be allowed on open space trails. I believe there's only 4 designated nature trails in Boulder, and the White Rocks Trail is one of these 4. My experience with e-bikes when I'm observing and studying raptors on county trails has been harrowing and honestly really upsetting sometimes. On trails like White Rocks, I'm focused on birds, and I'm often startled by e-bikes, not on White Rocks, but on county trails, startled by e-bikes as they whiz by quietly, fast, and without warning. I have real fears about a run-in and a trip to the hospital by a collision by one of these heavy and fast-moving bikes. In no way do e-bikes conform to the city's charter that requires trails to be used by non-motorized vehicles for quiet, recreational use and nature study and observations. E-bikes, they're a great asset. I'm glad they provide access for so many along the 300 miles of bikeways in the city of Boulder. But nature trails like White Rocks and the South Boulder Creek Trail should allow plenty of space for safe and peaceful nature observation and study. As I said, a collision with one of these massive bikes at 20 miles per hour is not a peaceful or safe experience. Please vote no on alternative B. And tonight, I didn't hear any survey results on visitors that had negative experiences with e-bikes. I feel like that.
Dana, your time is up, I'm afraid.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Now we have James Morris, Laura Thompson, and Linda Andes Georges.
Hi, I've been in Boulder for 50 years, biking to work and biking to see you. I was chair of the Sierra Club group, Indian Peaks group, and the Colorado chapter when we were trying to get support for this, for open space taxes. I wore a bear costume at Broadway, waving signs to try and get people to vote for open space. I walk, bike, birdwatch, look at wildflowers, go with friends via bike and on foot at South Boulder Creek and White Rocks. I support the Board of Trustees' recommendation. We should not weaken city charter. Sutherland knows way more about what people want than the Boulder Mountain Bike Alliance does. Open spaces for wildlife and people. There's a history of the destruction of wetlands by motorized vehicles. Open space, I was surprised, like tonight, there was a motorized gasoline engine on the Bear Creek path. I'm often surprised as I commute on that path and on Boulder Creek path. Electric bikes come up behind me. They're quiet. They do it at underpasses and curves, and they're going uphill fast. Often they're inexperienced and reckless. There was a commercial electric bike tour on Bear Creek one day going fast, and a bad accident at a curve before an underpass with blood all over the bike path. People don't follow the laws. Just a week and a half ago in the evening, I was bit on the Sanitas Trail by someone who was exercising her dog at night, and she likes to do that. Completely off leash, off voice control, just ran up and bit me. So I don't want electric, I go bird watching. I like to listen to frogs and owls. It's what makes Boulder okay. It's the wildlife and it's friendly people. I don't get those with electric bikes. So please stop this. And electric bikes are not good for the environment. You burn coal and natural gas. Excel's spending more money to improve their Pueblo power plant, another $34 million.
James, your time is up.
I know. Bye.
But thank you for your testimony. Okay, we've got Laura Thompson, Linda Andes Georges, and Dorothy Cohen.
Good evening. So I'm Laura Thompson. I own a home in the cottages at Wonderland Lake. On most days, and often multiple times a day, I walk my dog on the trail around the lake. Daily, hundreds of people walk and run in this area. People come to observe and photograph the many species of birds that spend time here. Some people come to fish, some come to do yoga or to meditate. In the spring and summer, I can hear birds singing, crickets chirping. I see baby bunnies running around while deer gather in the fields. Truly, this is a magical place, unlike many places I've ever been in the world. In the past months, I've observed an increase in the number of people flying through on electric bikes. Twice, not once, but twice, I've almost been hit. Most recently, it was at dusk by a group of teens on electric bikes buzzing through at full speed. That same night, there were other teens repeatedly doing donuts with their electric scooters on the dirt, stirring up dust while disrupting the calm. Several of my neighbors have shared that they too have been close to being hit. There are some bends with lower visibility on the trail that surrounds the lake, and I believe that motorized bikes and scooters on this trail, particularly at higher speeds, are dangerous. Please understand that I am not anti-electric bikes. I am adamantly against electric vehicles, including bikes and scooters on the trails at Wonderland Lake. They simply do not align with this space, a space that is quiet, it's peaceful, it's contemplative, a space used by people of all ages, and a space that is a natural habitat. I respectfully ask that you do not permit electric bikes or electric scooters on the path around Wonderland Lake, and preferably not on any of the trails in the Wonderland Lake area. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Now we have Linda Andes Georges, Dorothy Cohen, and Michael Browning.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Linda Andes George, 8417 Stirrup Lane in Longmont. This will take me just over 2 minutes, so hang on to the handlebars. I'd like to begin with a few personal bona fides for context. After our family moved here in the early 90s, I quickly joined 3 city organizations, BCNA, the City Trails Committee, and Boulder Bike Commuters. I became dedicated to doing most of my city commuting, including grocery shopping, on my little Fisher trail bike. In '96, when I joined the Open Space Board, I commuted from 55th Street to attend our Wednesday night meetings. So I do understand the pleasure of bikes, as well as the environmental urge to get more people on them. But setting aside all the atrocious impacts that motorized biking could wreak on our native botany and fauna, important as that is, and to the charter, unless we have a referendum, I'll confine myself to addressing the very mistaken supposition that this will get folks out of their cars. Here is what I know. When we lived in town near Baseline and 55th, our community had 50 houses. Despite the fact that there was little traffic then, nobody but me ever biked to work or to trailheads. Now we live in a county neighborhood of 50 houses. Many residents work or shop in Boulder, but there are only 3 of us who bike. And I can say with confidence, not a single resident besides myself will ever consider commuting 12 to 15 miles to go to work or to recreate on city trails. Who would add a half hour to a morning commute to do this? As for e-biking in the wind, rain, or cold, nope, not gonna happen. This week, my son and I took a sunny stroll around Wonderland Lake. Among the many walkers and dog walkers were 4 bikers. They passed us in a blur of speed, excessive given the crowds, and not one uttered "on your left" or rang a bell. Faster e-bikes will be a recipe for badly injuring someone, a deaf person, a small child, a loose dog. Lawsuits will ensue.
Linda, your time is up.
Alternative B. Thanks.
Thank you for your testimony. Now we have Dorothy Cohen, Michael Browning, and Jim Knopf.
My name is Dorothy Cohen, and I've lived in Boulder since 1974, and I use the open space mountain parks on a regular basis. I used to go to some of the trailheads that had bikes, and I don't enjoy being passed by bikes. We have to go off the side of the road, and I'm concerned that if you allow e-bikes, that us hikers are not going to enjoy it anymore. What everybody has said about having wildlife, and if the hikers have to go off the trail, we're hurting the flowers. I think there's no point in having e-bikes on mountain space open space trails. Keep them on the pavement. It's good to get to places or to do exercise on pavement, not on the open space. That I've noticed in the past that where bikes go, and especially if it's rainy, that there's ruts in the road. E-bikes are much heavier, and there's no reason to have e-bikes, on the open space. If you think a senior needs to have transportation to get to a trailhead, let them park their bike, let them put bike paths or something, bike things, so people can lock up their bikes and get out and walk. That's what the open space is. There are trails that I don't use anymore because there's too many bikes on them, and I don't enjoy being almost, they don't give you any warning that they're suddenly right upon you. Today I went hiking on the Goshawk Trail up by the yoga retreat center there, and there were 11 of us. We had one woman who was over 90. There's no reason that people shouldn't be able to hike on the open space and not have e-bikes there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. Now we have Michael Browning, Jim Knopf, and Charmaine Kleiber.
Good evening. My name is Mike Browning. I've lived and practiced law in Boulder for over 30 years. The staff wants you to make a legislative finding, quote unquote, that e-bikes are allowed as a, quote, passive recreational use on open space trails. This is because they see many benefits of allowing such use. And there may be some such benefits. But as noted by earlier speakers, you have no authority to make such a legislative finding. You did not pass the open space charter, nor did any previous city council. The charter was made law directly by a vote of the citizens, not by any city council, let alone this one. You cannot interpret, amend, or ignore the charter's terms or make any supposed legislative finding about its meaning, any more than you could with respect to a state statute or a Denver city ordinance or a provision in the US Constitution. They would simply be meaningless. When the citizens of Boulder passed the open space charter, they did not give the city council authority over open space lands. They created the Open Space Board of Trustees to manage and protect open space. They knew that a political body like yourself would be forever tempted to fudge on the limited uses allowed for open space lands in the charter to advance other political priorities and goals, just like you are being tempted to do now. But only the Open Space Board of Trustees has the legal authority to decide how open space lands and trails can be used. So even if allowing e-bikes was the best idea in the world, you have no authority to grant such use. You have no authority to do anything except follow the determination made on this issue by the Open Space Board of Trustees. Only they can decide when, if, and how e-bikes can be used on open space trails. You have no choice but to follow the decision on this matter made by the Open Space Board of Trustees. You should not try to override their decision by an illegal and absurd legislative finding that the word passive doesn't actually mean what we all know it means. And the staff in the city attorney's office should be ashamed for suggesting
your time
otherwise.
is up. But
thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Our last two speakers are Jim Knopf and Charmaine Kleiber.
Jim Knopf, city resident. Having been on the Parks Board, Water Board, and Open Space Board, I've seen a lot of issues like the e-bike question tonight. With this background, I'd like to support the current Open Space Board recommendation as presented by Dave Kuntz, possibly with an exceptions provision. In other words, keep open the ability to make rare exceptions to a general policy, but only with a carefully considered process for exceptions that make sense. Most important, support the OSBT plan as favored by so many people tonight for so many reasons. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Final speaker, Charmaine Kleiber. Take us home, Charmaine.
Hello, thank you very much. Everyone has spoken so eloquently on this issue, and I'll just add just a few of my own comments. I live in Lafayette. I live on the Rothman open space. I am about 100 feet from the open space trailhead in Lafayette. We see e-bikes go by every day at 20 miles an hour. When I hike on the open space, I hike at 3 miles an hour. When I bird on an open space, I bird at about 1 mile an hour. So having people course by me at 20 miles an hour is really very disruptive, and it cannot be entertained as a passive use of the open space. I really encourage people to adopt the OSBT recommendation for open space, and thank you very much for taking time for hearing me.
Thank you, Charmaine. And with that, that brings our public comment period to a close. I want to thank all of the speakers. We had a lot of former city council members, a lot of former open space board of trustee members. Thanks for your continued involvement in the community, as well as everybody else who spoke. So now bring us back just to see if anybody has any follow-up questions for anyone based on the public testimony, and then we'll go to discussions. Nicole?
Yeah, thank you. I do just have a few questions. One of the things that I'm wondering about after hearing folks speak tonight, is there anything in the education that we do, or in thinking about how we do education for people who are riding bikes, around helping them understand appropriate behavior that can also help them understand that our comfort levels in terms of what we can tolerate when we're on the paths may be a little bit different depending on where we are in our lives and our abilities. So I was just wondering if there's anything in the education that sort of speaks to that, you know, I think we often have the impression that everybody feels the same way we do. And so, you know, if we're comfortable with a 15 or 20 mile an hour bike going past us, everybody will, but that's not true. And so I'm wondering, you know, how we address that in our education if we do.
I can start with that, Casey. So our education and outreach team, it has a very robust program with programs, events, and experiences. They really are who our visitors engage with most frequently. Absolutely, we can. We do lots of one-on-one conversations, and absolutely, those are some messages that we can. I don't know if they're doing it today, and that's where I'm going to turn to Casey. But if it's not being done today, it's certainly something that we can be adding to our system and to our programs.
And recently we have been researching how to more effectively communicate and how visitors can communicate effectively with each other on their trails. And so that is something we've been looking at, the yield sign, the effectiveness of that, how to evolve that sign. And so we are looking at, you know, updating our signs, looking at more effective messaging so that we understand as trail users how to be courteous to each other. So that's ongoing research, and we continue to engage with other land use managers in that conversation, what's been successful, and try to implement that as soon as we can, you know, as things change.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Another question that I had is, do we know if visitors do they bring e-bikes with the same sort of regularity as folks who are kind of biking to trails in the first place? I'm thinking about even trying to load up my non-e-bike onto my car. That's a lot, and you know, thinking about the extra weight of the e-bike, that feels really hard to me. Just trying to imagine it. I don't have an e-bike. Maybe that's why I don't know yet. But just wondering about, you know, how many people are visitors who wouldn't maybe be getting some of the messaging and education that residents and students and others who live here would get.
I don't know if I fully understand the question.
Oh, sorry, Wendy. Sorry, it's getting late and I'm getting rambly. The question is just around, do we have a sense of how many visitors to Boulder who don't live here, who may not be exposed to the education, the community conversations we're having, how many of them are bringing e-bikes in that may just not know or not be receiving some of the education that everybody else gets?
Well, our visitor surveys do track where people are coming in from, and we do get a lot of visitors that aren't Boulder residents. So I think that it's not just our Boulder residents and our regular students and those familiar. The other piece about a lot of e-bikers or the folks that responded to the online engagement, which where there were more e-bikers than non-e-bikers, I think, indicated that they would ride to the trail in addition to riding on the trail. So the likelihood of those using bikes or e-bikes is that they choose to get to the trail other than driving.
Okay, and I think, and sorry, you were about to speak.
Oh,
I was just going to clarify a point.
Oh, I was just going to say there are a couple other tools, just such as our website and our trailhead, kiosk information and those other types of information for visitors who, might not be involved in these type of community discussions, but to get that word out on the system. So I was just going to say that those are some just additional tools.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think what I was just wondering was, do visitors bring e-bikes at different rates than residents bring e-bikes? Do we have any idea?
I don't know that we have an idea because we don't currently allow them.
Yeah.
And the best resource in terms of peer agencies would be Boulder County Parks and Open Space. I don't know, I would have to get back to you about residents versus non-residents, but they are beginning to track e-bike use on their system.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the convoluted question. Trying to think about education. And then, I was really interested in what some of the folks were talking about around data. Are there data that we will track on some of the positive outcomes that we are expecting to see, like increased accessibility, reduced vehicle miles traveled? And then are there any data that we're planning on tracking about potential negative impacts?
Yeah, and some of those, the conflicts that we currently ask in our visitor surveys, did you experience an interaction? Was there a conflict? Who was that with? Where was that? So we are already tracking that, and so we do have some baseline data, and we'll be adding the e-bike, if we allow e-bikes, to be able to understand that more clearly as well.
Great, thank you.
I have a question. I want your opinion on Wonderland Lake. I read a lot of the emails to us about people concerned about how safe it was, being that Wonderland Lake is really populated with walkers, etc. How do you feel about Wonderland Lake in terms of safety? Your opinion?
I think in terms of trail design, those trails are very similar to the other trails that we are recommending e-bikes on, in terms of they're very similar in characteristics to the other trails east of Broadway. They are more similar than some of the other trails like down in the south of our system, like Springbrook Loop in that area. So they are consistently character-wise. Why we didn't initially include them was because of our geographic boundary.
I just have one follow-up question. I think we had a few speakers say that the open space charter prohibits motorized vehicles, but I don't believe that is in the charter specifically. Can you address that, please?
No, it's not in the charter. The Visitor Master Plan is the document that defines the charter. So the charter does limit open space purposes to, and one of those purposes is passive recreation. And passive recreation is defined in the Visitor Master Plan, and it is defined as non-motorized activity that achieve a set of criteria that's related to, visitor experience, protecting natural resources, and we can pull up that criteria that we showed, but it's not in the charter, it's the VMP.
Great, thanks for clarifying.
I'd like to just jump in and give our Attorney Janet Michaels, Senior Counsel, an opportunity to add some additional thoughts to that.
Janet, thanks for being here.
Thank you, and thank you, council members. Good evening. There's an entire section of the Boulder Revised Code that regulates vehicles on open space, including motor vehicles. So there's nothing specifically that says motor vehicles are prohibited in the charter or in the Boulder Revised Code.
Thanks for that clarification. Junie, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Can you talk a little bit more about the type of outreach that was done around the OSBT 3%? Thank you.
The OSBT 3%, in terms of the number of trails that would be supported by, that was a map that was produced to characterize what we initially, and this is cursory, think the motions passed by the Open Space Board of Trustees would support on the system. It was after our engagement, so it wasn't something that was brought out to the community for input. It was the result of the bringing the item forward to the board and their motions.
Thank you.
Is that it?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I got Matt with a question, and then maybe we'll do discussion.
Pardon me. Thanks for the opportunity to ask the question. I just want to piggyback a little bit on what Janet Michael said, and maybe just sort of bring this full circle based on a number of concerns that residents brought up in public comment, which was, so given that the definitions of motorized vehicle and those sort of uses are not defined in the open space charter itself, and it is in the visitor master plan, what entity ultimately has jurisdiction from which to amend that visitor master plan and ultimately set the definitions of those terms that are used within the open space charter?
Thank you for that question. This is Janet Michaels again with the City Attorney's Office. Actually, there is a definition in the definition of motor vehicles. It specifically excludes e-bikes from that definition. So there is a reference to motor vehicles or to e-bikes, and they're classified as not being motor vehicles in the code. But what the visitor master plan is, it would be city council that implements elements of it. So the master plan is like any visitor master plan is like any master plan. It's a guidance document. It's not law in and of itself until city council adopts something regulating a piece of that master plan. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so to paraphrase, like we get guidance from our boards like any other situation, and then it is this body that ultimately says yes or no to that proposed plan. And the visitor master plan for OSMP is no different than any of the others that we do on a regular basis.
Absolutely, correct.
For clarifying.
Okay, not seeing any more questions, then let's come back for discussion. So our first point of decision is we have two ordinances in front of us. We have Ordinance 8575, which implements the staff recommendation of allowing e-bikes on open space, and we have Ordinance 8576 from the Open Space Board of Trustees, which does not allow them except in certain limited circumstances. Would anyone like to speak to which approach, which ordinance we should adopt tonight?
Repeat those two.
8575 is the staff recommendation for allowing e-bikes. 8576 is the OSBT recommendation. You can get started here, Tara.
Sure, I will. First of all, I want to say to everybody that spoke, thank you so much. You're so passionate about open space, and so but I want to just say that my husband, I just want to say really a quick anecdote. Sorry, Aaron. My husband, is disabled, and he would have been here tonight to talk about e-bikes, but he can't sit in those chairs, and he can't walk very far, but one thing he can do is go on an e-bike. So he, because of e-bikes, have the opportunity to be outside, but for him to be able to be on open space, he's never been able to do that. So that would open up a whole new world for him. And since, of course, I'm getting a little old, so, my torn meniscus and whatnot, I had to go from hiking, which was my favorite thing in the world, to e-biking. I also would like to be on, outside in nature rather than just, on the Goose Creek Trail. Not that it isn't a nice trail. So for that reason, I'm going to suggest option B, because I feel like for seniors especially, it opens up a whole new world where they really can't walk that far. And they will be able to, so many of us, because I'm a senior in like 3 months, will be able to enjoy the open space like we want to. So that's something that really hasn't been discussed, and as my husband wants to hear the birds as much as anybody, so just throwing that out there. So I'm going to suggest B, I thought it was a great plan that you had. I feel like the reason why I would pick B rather than B plus or A minus or whatever other things we've decided is because I think it would be a good opportunity to try this, get the community used to it, see that it works, calm everybody's worries, and fix anything that might need fixing. So then if everything works well, we can move on from that.
Thanks, Tara. So in other words, you're supporting 8575 with the staff recommendation, that ordinance, right? And then I wasn't very clear, but I'm thinking that first we determine which ordinance to pass, and then after that we would give direction on which trails we'd recommend if 8575. But you had a lovely speech, so jumped right into it. Anybody else on which ordinance we should pass? And we don't all have to talk. I can take a straw poll if people don't want to give speeches. I'm seeing kind of nodding heads. So can we do a, yeah, Lauren?
Do we need a second?
Well, I'm going to, well, somebody could just make a motion, yeah, if somebody would like to do that.
I'd like to make a motion that we pass ordinance 8575. Do I need to read it all?
Okay. I think that's good enough, right?
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Do you want to speak to your motion, Lauren?
I think that a lot of this has already been covered. I mean, our packet was pretty thorough, but for me, it really is about having equitable access and open space, and also the changing technology. You know, we heard many commenters talk about the Pandora's box of not being able to regulate various things effectively, but I think that really we're already there. Like, there are e-bikes these days that you cannot differentiate from regular bikes, and I think that you're sort of setting the regulations as they are set up sort of a system where people who can afford the most expensive bikes can get away with sort of riding under the radar. And in addition to that, I do think that it follows our transportation goals, our city goals, our equity goals. There's a lot of reasons to support it.
Thanks. Nicole, did you want to address the second?
Yeah, I just had a couple of things. But first of all, I know a lot of folks went home because it was getting late. But thanks to the community for the dialogue tonight. I really appreciated that so many people shared their perspectives, especially without personal attacks on council and staff. As much as we all try to have thick skins, staying away from those kinds of personal attacks really makes it a lot easier to hear people's concerns. So thank you for that to those who were able to do that tonight. And, I think, Tara, you shared my reasons for supporting this ordinance as well. Not all of us have the types of bodies that allow us to keep doing in our 80s what we were doing in our 20s. And I think that this really does allow more of us to keep enjoying our trails, even as our bodies need some extra assistance. I also just really appreciate staff's work and compromise. I'd actually have supported the original alternative A, and I expect that in the future we're going to be opening up all of our trails that allow bikes to e-bikes before too long, but I appreciate that this gradual approach is a good middle ground for now. And I'm really hoping that these changes will make our trails more accessible, and I'm really glad to hear that we'll be monitoring outcomes and impacts as well. I think that's going to be really important to the community to build trust and hopefully help our future OSBT and future council when we come back to this discussion in the future about more biking trails. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Nicole. I'm going to call on myself, if that's all right, just for real quickly. I'll be supporting the motion. I do feel like this is a good step forward for differently abled bodies. And I think it's important that we follow the data that shows that so many of our partner organizations have implemented these regulations, and there has not been an increase in conflicts. And I know that we're going to track that, right? So if for some reason we see something different around here, we'll learn about that, right? So I look forward to seeing those results. So, and then, we do have any number of additional benefits. I won't go on for a long time, but I'm looking forward to supporting the motion, and we'll talk about trails. Anybody else before I call for a vote? All right, seeing none. Elisha, I believe this is a roll call.
Yes, sir, this is a roll call, and I will read the actual title of the ordinance into the record after the vote. So we will start this vote with Councilmember Yates.
Yes.
Benjamin?
Yes.
Mayor Brockett?
Yes.
Councilmember Folkerts?
Yes.
Councilmember Joseph?
Yes.
Spear?
Yes.
And Weiner.
Yes.
Ordinance 8575, which is to allow electric-assisted bicycles on certain recreational paths or trails on open space land by amending definitions in Section 1-2-1 and 7-1-1, repealing Section 7-5-25, no electric-assisted bicycles on open space, amending Section 8-3-6, vehicle regulation, and adding a new Section 8-8-12, electric assisted bicycles on open space, BRC 1981, and setting forth related details. Has been approved with a vote of 7-0.
Thanks so much. Okay, great. So let's then move on to our last thing tonight, which is this is not I don't think this is a motion, or it's definitely not an ordinance, but council direction about which trails we would like to suggest that the staff implement e-bikes, allow e-bikes on. And if people don't mind, I'm just going to tee this up. So we have option B, which was the staff recommendation of trails east of Broadway that already allow bikes, plus the Boulder Canyon Trail. And then there's B plus that adds on to that Chapman Drive up from Boulder Canyon, and then the Wonderland Lake Trail and the Foothills South Trail. And since I put out the hotline on this, I just mentioned that those trails do have the same or very similar characteristics to those east trails in that they're wide to prevent additional user conflicts, and they also all serve transportation functions. And I'll just mention too, though, that even if you're using an open space trail to get from one place to another, you're still hearing the birds, seeing the flowers, and enjoying the outdoors and those open space values. So just make that point that it's still an open space experience, even if you're going from one place to another. So maybe I can just call for a straw poll on this between B and B+. But first I'll hear a couple thoughts.
Thank you. At this time, I will be supporting B, similar to Tara, and I think part of the reason why is because as I was hearing the conversation today, I was very torn between supporting Ordinance 8575 and 8576. And part how I was able to think through it is when I asked the question of how much community engagement has been done on the 3%. And my understanding at the time there was none. And with B+, even though my understanding, you came up with it, or some of the members of the board came up with it based on deductive inferences from the community engagement, to me that's not good enough. So based on that similar logic, I will be supporting B, which is the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeannie. Without seeing any other hands raised, I'll go to a straw poll. So we'll start with B. Hands raised of who would prefer B. I got 2 hands, and who would prefer B+? And I got 5 hands. So we got a council majority with a recommendation of the B+ set of trails. And with that, I think we've reached the end. Do you all need anything else from us, or is this sufficient?
No, it covers us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. I know this has been a huge amount of work for staff, a huge amount of outreach. OSBT has worked on this incredibly hard. I appreciate that we had 4 of the OSBT board members who were at that hearing here tonight. Thanks everyone for all of your hard work and your testimony, and we look forward to the next steps. Yeah, Bob?
Whoever's controlling the Zoom, Rachel would now like to rejoin us by Zoom, and she's in the waiting room, so she can vote in this last matter.
All right. So if we can go to our final public hearing, please, Alicia.
All right, sir. Thank you. Our final item on the agenda tonight is our second public hearing, item 5B. It is the second reading and consideration of a motion to adopt Ordinance 8574, approving annual supplemental appropriations to the 2023 budget and setting forth related details.
Thank you, Alicia. And as staff get situated, as with any budget, there are times during the year then we must adjust, and either new things come up or there's a shift in how we want to expend monies. We usually come to you with some adjustments to base recommendations. This is one such moment, and hopefully I've given you enough time to situate yourself, Mark.
You did. Thank you, Nuria. Good evening, Council. Mark Wolf, Budget Officer. Nuria teed it up very well. I get to introduce a colleague tonight, Raphael Tingley, our Senior Budget Analyst, who will be handling our presentation. Hopefully it is fairly brief. You are well versed in adjustments to base. We do have to do these from time to time, and we'd like to try to highlight some of the most significant items within what ends up being a fairly significant package, since we only do a couple of these a year. So with that, I will hand it off to Raphael.
Good evening, Council. My name is Raphael Tingley. I am a senior budget analyst in the finance department, and tonight I'll be running through a brief presentation that provides an overview of Ordinance 8574, or the first adjustment to base, sometimes called ATB1. Each year we have at least 2 supplemental budget appropriations which are presented to City Council for review and approval. These mid-year adjustments to the budget are necessary to respond to new priorities, emerging community needs, and occasionally emergencies. Departments have some flexibility to respond to these unanticipated needs by realigning their budgets, but in cases where existing fund appropriation is not sufficient and need is warranted, then the Budget Office, with consultation from our executive budget team, will recommend increasing appropriation through the mid-year adjustment process. Through the expanded use of spending projection tools and budget to actuals reporting, we've been able to better identify when certain needs will be very likely to require additional appropriation, and in some cases where there may be some anticipated savings in the fund, whether through, for example, position vacancy savings or deferred capital projects, we've recommended that in those cases, departments meet those needs by utilizing their existing appropriation without an adjustment. However, because of this new approach, it may be the case that we'll come back in our second adjustment to base in the fall and make the necessary adjustments should it turn out that appropriation wasn't sufficient. So in other words, the fall adjustment may be more reactive rather than proactive. And really, this is all in an effort to better align our expenses to our budgets and only appropriating the funding which we truly expect to be needed and used in the current fiscal year. There are 3 types of budget adjustments that we perform. We have additional appropriations from fund balance, additional appropriations deriving from grants and donations revenue, and additional appropriations from other unbudgeted revenues. This would include certain taxes or fees being remitted at higher rates than anticipated when the budget was adopted. The table on this slide shows how the recommended adjustments fall across these 3 categories at the top, and then whether they are one-time or ongoing in nature. I'll point out here that about 98% of the recommended adjustments fall within that one-time category. That's a change from previous May adjustments the past few years, where in 2021 and 2022, a major focus of our mid-year adjustments had been the restoration of services and programs that were scaled back during the pandemic, and so there had been significant additions of ongoing resources in those adjustments. This year, our recommendations are almost completely one-time, kind of recognizing the desire to funnel ongoing requests into the regular budget development cycle, so all department needs can be evaluated comprehensively and strategically at one time. With that preamble, I'm just going to quickly highlight a few of the adjustments that we're recommending to Council this evening. So first, with a spate of facility repairs needed across several city buildings, we're recommending an additional $1.3 million out of the general fund to support these needed repairs, including HVAC system repairs, leak repairs at the recreation centers, and continued rehabilitation of the main library from the drug use problem identified late last year. $300,000 in additional funding out of the general fund to increase the city's contract with Boulder Shelter for the Homeless to respond to increases in staffing and operational costs due to the high inflationary environment. $300,000 is requested from Human Services funds within the general fund for allocation towards the property acquisition of the Tribe Recovery Home, which will be used for behavioral health services and will provide temporary housing to low-income community members, including those experiencing substance use disorders. The adjustment also calls for an investment of $150,000 towards additional eviction prevention and rental assistance services, where the city experienced an uptick in demand for these services as the federal rental assistance program, which was started during the pandemic, has begun to draw to an end. The program continues to experience sustained high demand, and additional funding is needed to prevent eviction for those who are at most immediate risk of losing their housing. We are recommending a $125,000 investment to support a robust community engagement process co-led by Growing Up Boulder in the city to become a UNICEF USA child-friendly city. This associated youth plan will inform how to spend approximately $2 million of funding that the city received earlier this year resulting from the sale of the Denver Broncos, and will further develop citywide alignment and coordination on the city's youth engagement and activities. There are some programmatic needs within the Parks and Recreation Department to increase their staffing by about 4.5 FTEs to enhance recreation programming at several of the recreation centers. We have a slew of grant revenues that the city was fortunate enough to receive recently, and we are recommending appropriating these grants to move forward several initiatives, including about $3.5 million in grants that will fund a portion of the modular factory housing project, just under $300,000 in Colorado state grants that will fund open space restoration activities at Lower Boulder Creek wetland, and a federal grant for $72,000, which will fund the thinning of 72 acres of forest in Enchanted Mesa for fire risk reduction. Lastly, budget is recommending the transfer of about $10.62 million in fund balance after reserves within the general fund, and setting that amount aside within the governmental capital fund in anticipation of two high-cost but key capital projects which are on the horizon. Those would be the new day services center that HHS will be getting off the ground next year, which will serve individuals experiencing homelessness, and also funding to support the site development and horizontal infrastructure of the Alpine Balsam development, where that site will support both affordable housing being built by Boulder Housing Partners on the western side of that site, as well as the Western City campus on the southeastern corner where the medical pavilion is. This transfer from the general fund to the GovCap fund is really aimed at setting the stage for supporting both of these projects, which we expect to come forward as part of 2024 budget development. And the transfer demonstrates that this portion of fund balance after reserves will likely be used to advance these capital priorities in the near to mid future. And that concludes our presentation, and Mark and I are available for questions.
Thanks so much for that and for sticking with us past the 9 o'clock hour. Speaking of which, actually, we're overdue for a time check. Are people okay with finishing this out? All right, I got a couple yawns, but also a head nod. So, questions for staff? And Rachel, welcome back to the meeting. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. Then let's go to our public hearing. We have one person signed up to speak. They will get 3 minutes. And so, Lynn Segal, you are our one and only speaker.
No, no, and no. My goodness, how many times have I told you, stop subsidizing the developer? Look at each one of these things, 1.3 on HVAC and leaks and drug use in the library. Why do we have the drug use? Because of people desperate, in despair, because they can't afford to live here anymore, because you subsidize the developers to condos on every corner. Snap out of it. Snap out. Tribe, behavioral. They can't behave because they're on meth, because they're desperate. Eviction. They're desperate. They have no place to live. They can't afford to live here anymore. All of these things are predictable. You have no right to spend my money on them. You know, one of them stole my catalytic converter. How many hundreds of dollars in sales tax revenue? Take that away. I won't spend it. I won't have it spent on this stuff. That's predictable. You caused it. All of you caused it. Do not subsidize the developer. Child things with the Broncos. We should have charity from the Broncos, $125,000 there. Parks and Recreation, $300,000. Yes, we have all these needs. Parks and Rec, like tonight, like the e-bikes development, because you've got so many people coming here attracted to the athletic opportunities on the e-bikes that you just passed, which you should not have, you should be so ashamed of. How can you do this? You know, I grew up, my mom and dad met in the hiking club. And you've got to have e-bikes. Oh, that's a different subject, right? No, they're all integrated. Caroline Miller knows that from Open Space Mountain Boards, Open Space Board of Trustees. Do not fire her. She knows what's really going on here. You folks are in trouble now. Look at this bill. Let's go on down the line items. 10.6 million, the general fund that you got from the library district just sold off my library. I'm not happy with that. $10,625,000 from the general fund stuffed with your sale of my library. How dare you? How dare you? Unbelievable. I hope you sleep tonight. Shame on you.
Thanks, Lynn. Okay, we'll close the public hearing, bring it back to council for discussion or a motion. Yes, Nicole.
Just wanted to say thank you to staff for the presentation, for all the work that goes into this. I feel like this is probably some of the hardest work, and yet it always amazes me that we can spend $30 million and have one person come and talk to us about it, and have very, very little discussion. But I think it also just speaks to the quality of the work that you all do, and yeah, just the trust that the community has in us, that we're spending the money appropriately. So anyway, thank you very much for all the work. Appreciate it.
Did you want to go from there to a motion?
Oh,
maybe?
sure. May as well, as long as my mic's on. I would like to make a motion to adopt Ordinance 8574, approving annual supplemental appropriations to the 2023 budget.
I second that.
And setting forth related details.
Oh, yes, and setting forth related details. Thank you.
Second that too.
Great. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I will go for a vote. This would be a roll call.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. This roll call, we will begin with Councilmember Benjamin.
Yes.
Mayor Brockett.
Yes.
Councilmember Folkerts.
Yes.
Friend.
Yes.
Joseph.
Yes.
Spear.
Yes.
Weiner.
Yes.
And Yates.
Yes.
Ordinance 8574 is hereby adopted with a vote of 8-0.
Thanks so much. And I want to echo Nicole's words that the reason why that was quick was not because we're not paying attention, but because you all have done such an amazing job. So hugely grateful for all your work. And that brings us to the end of our meeting. Any final thoughts before we wrap up? Did you have something?
Yeah, I just felt badly that I hope other departments don't feel badly when their public hearings and things do take longer. So anyway, just appreciate it. But I am curious about, just as we move forward, especially with our new budgeting process that we start doing from year to year, how do we get the community to pay more attention, to give us some feedback on this kind of stuff? And anyway, hopeful that some of the key outcomes and things we're looking at will help with that too. But thank you.
Matt?
Just reflecting on the night, we had largely a really, really good discourse, and there was the exception of one individual who took an opportunity to talk about violence against members of the community, and I think we have to be better, and that's something that I hope that individual and others recognize, that we are all trying to do our part in this community, and those statements and those actions are just not accepted in our community.
Thanks for that. All right, well, I will go ahead and gavel is closed. Thanks everybody for a great meeting at 9:28 p.m.